Section 1. Where it all began. The origins of Family Guy. There is a school in Providence, Rhode Island, called the Rhode Island School of Design. People in the know call it RISD. They pronounce it like the word Rizzy, and it is one of the most prestigious art and design schools in the entire United States. Its hallways are full of students who are serious about their craft, students who stay up late sketching, students who genuinely believe they are going to change the world with a pencil. And in the early 1990s, one of those students was a young man from Kent, Connecticut, named Seth Woodbury McFarlane. He was born on the 26th of October 1973, which means he was still a teenager when he walked through RISD's doors. And what he created while he was there, not in some big-budget studio, not in a famous production house in Hollywood, but in a college classroom, and almost certainly also in his dorm room, eventually became one of the longest-running animated shows in television history. That show is Family Guy. And the facts surrounding how it came to exist, who built it, how it almost never happened, how it died twice and came back both times, how it predicted real-world events, how it shaped a generation of comedy writers, and how it generated controversies that echoed all the way into foreign governments, all of those facts are worth sitting with, slowly, one by one. So, settle in, get comfortable. This is going to take a while, and that is very much by design. Fact 1. Seth MacFarlane originally had no intention of creating Family Guy. He had no grand scheme to pitch a television show. He was simply making his senior thesis film a piece of animation he needed to complete in order to graduate. That film was called The Life of Larry, and it was completed in 1995. It ran for about 11 minutes. It featured a slovenly, dim-witted, middle-aged man named Larry Cummings and his talking dog Steve. Larry had a wife named Lois. He had an overweight teenage son named Milt. And if you watch that thesis film today, you will immediately recognize every single one of those characters. Larry Cummings is Peter Griffin, Steve the dog is Brian Griffin, even Lois kept her name. The thesis film that a 21-year-old made for a class became the skeleton of a show that would eventually air more than 400 episodes. Fact 2. MacFarlane did not just draw inspiration from his own imagination when creating Larry and Steve. He was drawing from television he had grown up with, sitcoms and cartoons from the 1970s and 1980s. He specifically cited The Simpsons as a major influence, and has said that watching The Simpsons while he was at RISD actually made him change his original career goal. He had wanted to work for Disney. After seeing The Simpsons, he shifted his focus entirely toward primetime adult animation. The Simpsons showed him that animation could do more than children's entertainment. It could be sharp, it could be satirical, it could be for adults. That realization changed the direction of his entire life. Fact 3. MacFarlane's thesis professor at RISD submitted The Life of Larry to the animation studio Hanna-Barbera without MacFarlane's prompting. The professor believed in the film enough to share it with working professionals in the industry. Hanna-Barbera saw it, liked what they saw, and offered MacFarlane a job. So by the time he was fresh out of college, MacFarlane was already employed in animation. He went to work on shows like Johnny Bravo, Cow and Chicken, and Dexter's Laboratory. These were children's cartoons, but they gave him professional experience, industry connections, and a working understanding of how to get jokes across in the animated format. He was learning the machinery of cartoon production from the inside. Fact 4. In 1996, while still working at Hanna-Barbera, MacFarlane created a sequel to his thesis film. He called it Larry and Steve. This short film aired on Cartoon Network as part of a program called What a Cartoon, which was essentially a showcase for short animated films that might eventually become full series. The What a Cartoon block was actually quite significant in animation history. It was the launch platform for a number of shows that became major properties. MacFarlane's Larry and Steve short appeared alongside other experimental cartoons and got a respectable reception. It was, in retrospect, the second public test of what would eventually become Family Guy. Fact 5. Fox passed on Family Guy the first time MacFarlane pitched it. The initial pitch actually came at the same time that Mike Judge was pitching King of the Hill. Fox was hesitant to add another animated comedy to their lineup alongside The Simpsons, which was already their flagship animation property. They passed on MacFarlane and went with King of the Hill instead. But here is the twist: when King of the Hill became successful, Fox executives started to think that maybe they had made a mistake. Maybe there was room for more adult animation on Sunday nights after all. MacFarlane followed up with Fox roughly a year later, and this time the network was more receptive. They gave him $50,000 to develop a pilot. Fact 6. $50,000 sounds like a decent sum of money, but in the world of animated television pilots, it is almost nothing. A typical half-hour animated pilot in the late 1990s cost somewhere in the range of $1 million to produce. Fox gave MacFarlane approximately 5% of the normal budget and expected him to deliver something worth putting on television. MacFarlane animated the pilot largely from his own home, working with a production partner named Jim Keeshan. He spent 6 months on it. The result was a 15-minute short that Fox liked enough to greenlight as a full series. MacFarlane would later remark that the difference between The Life of Larry and Family Guy was essentially that The Life of Larry was shown in his dorm room and Family Guy was shown after the Super Bowl. Fact 7. The pilot episode of Family Guy, titled Death Has a Shadow, aired on the 31st of January, 1999. It aired immediately following Super Bowl 33, which had just been played between the Denver Broncos and the Atlanta Falcons. The Broncos won, by the way, 34-19, with John Elway taking his final bow as a professional quarterback. After the game ended and the confetti settled and millions of Americans were sitting on their couches, still full of chips, and wondering if they really needed to watch the post-game show, Fox aired the very first episode of Family Guy. Approximately 22 million people saw it. That is an enormous number for a debut, and much of it was a product of the Super Bowl lead-in. But it planted a seed. Fact 8. Despite that enormous premiere audience, the first season of Family Guy averaged only 12.8 million households. That sounds good, but in context it placed the show around 33rd in the overall Nielsen ratings for the year. For a show with a Super Bowl premiere, 33rd was not exactly a triumph. Fox had expected the Super Bowl bounce to carry the show higher. When it did not, the network's confidence in the series began to wobble. The clock was already ticking, even in year 1. Fact 9. The pilot episode features Lois Griffin with blonde hair. This is one of the earliest and most obscure visual differences between the pilot and every subsequent episode. Lois's now iconic red hair was a design decision made after the pilot was completed. In the aired version that most people know, she has always been a redhead. But in that original 15-minute pilot, she was blonde. Small details like that were quietly changed as the show moved into full production, smoothed out as the animators and designers settled into what the Griffin family was actually supposed to look like. Fact 10. MacFarlane originally had an idea to pitch Family Guy not to Fox, but as a segment on the sketch comedy show Mad TV. He thought short animated vignettes might work well within that format. He abandoned the idea when he realized Mad TV's budget was nowhere near large enough to support animation production. The financial constraints of sketch television pushed him toward the network pitch model, which ultimately resulted in Family Guy becoming a standalone show. Had Mad TV had a bigger budget, the Griffin family might have existed only as brief recurring bits between live-action comedy sketches. Fact 11. The name Peter Griffin was arrived at through a deliberate creative process of trying to find a name that felt like it belonged to a particular kind of American man. MacFarlane and his collaborators wanted something that felt ordinary, slightly old-fashioned, and somehow both generic and specific at the same time. Peter is a common name with a certain working-class resonance. Griffin has an Irish ring to it that fits with Peter's background and his general attitude. Together they form a name that sounds like someone you might actually know, which was always part of the point. He is not a cartoon name. He is a real person's name given to a cartoon character. Fact 12. The town of Stoolbend. Wait, wrong show. The Griffin family lives in a fictional Rhode Island city, and the show set them there partly because of MacFarlane's genuine connection to the state from his RISD years. Rhode Island has a very specific regional character. It is small, insular, dominated by a particular culture of working-class New England life. MacFarlane knew that world from living inside it for 4 years. He knew how people talked, what they cared about, how they moved through their neighborhoods. The fictional city where the Griffins live is built on that real knowledge. Fact 13. The theme song for Family Guy, which opens with Peter and Lois sitting at the piano and flows into the whole family dancing through the living room, was heavily inspired by the theme song from All in the Family, the legendary 1970s CBS sitcom, starring Carol O'Connor as Archie Bunker. That show also began with the lead couple at a piano. The musical style, the opening domestic image, and the general warmth of the melody were all meant to echo that classic show. MacFarlane admired All in the Family deeply. And Peter Griffin, as a character, owes a significant debt to Archie Bunker, a working-class man with strong opinions, limited self-awareness, and a wife who is smarter than he is and loves him anyway. Fact 14. Seth MacFarlane does not just voice Peter Griffin. He voices Peter, Brian, Stewie, and Quagmire. 4 of the main characters on the show come out of one man's mouth. This is an extraordinary range, and each voice is genuinely distinct. He has done all 4 voices simultaneously in interviews, switching between them on demand. But here's the thing people often do not realize: the voice he has to work hardest to maintain is Stewie. Stewie's voice requires sustained physical effort. MacFarlane has described the Stewie voice as the most demanding of the 4 because of the precision and energy needed to sustain the British accent and the theatrical quality of the character's speech. Brian, by contrast, is close to MacFarlane's own natural speaking voice. Fact 15. Peter Griffin's voice is based on a real person. That person is a man named Paul Timmins, who worked as the director of public safety at the Rhode Island School of Design when MacFarlane was a student there. MacFarlane and his friends used to laugh at the way Timmins talked. According to MacFarlane, Timmins had a thick Rhode Island accent and absolutely no filter. He would say whatever was on his mind, at full volume, without editing himself. MacFarlane described him as being completely incapable of self-censorship. When a local news station in New England tracked down Paul Timmins in 2013, Timmins confirmed the story and was good-humored about it. He told reporters he was proud of the connection. He said, clearly and without hesitation, that he knew the character of Peter Griffin was an idiot, and that he was the inspiration for it, and he was fine with both of those things. Fact 16. Stewie Griffin's British accent has an origin story that is genuinely charming. MacFarlane developed the voice in college as a parlor trick. He was doing an impression of Rex Harrison, the actor famous for his role as Professor Henry Higgins in My Fair Lady, a 1964 musical film. MacFarlane learned to do this impression specifically because, in his own words, it was a good way to get girls to talk to him at parties. The theatrical, crisp, slightly pompous quality of the Rex Harrison impression eventually became the foundation of Stewie's voice. A baby megalomaniac who sounds like a mid-century British actor because his creator used to do impressions at college parties is one of the more delightful origin stories in television history. Fact 17. Quagmire's voice is an homage to a completely different era of American culture. MacFarlane based it on the style of fast-talking radio announcers from the 1940s and 1950s, the kind of voice you would hear on a late-night jazz radio broadcast or a variety show from that era. There was a particular breathless energy to those announcers, a kind of perpetually enthusiastic hustle. MacFarlane took that style and filtered it through a much darker, more lascivious character, which is what gives Quagmire his particular quality of sounding cheerful about things that are not cheerful. The visual design of Quagmire, meanwhile, was based on the face of Bob Hope. Fact 18. Cleveland Brown, who was a main supporting character before eventually getting his own spin-off show, was voiced by Mike Henry. Henry based Cleveland's voice on a real person he met while playing basketball. The man pronounced the state name Maryland as Merlin. He flattened and softened all the syllables into something that sounded almost like a character from a fairy tale. Henry found that voice so interesting that he started mimicking it, and it eventually became Cleveland. Henry also voiced the character of Herbert, the elderly neighbor, whose deeply uncomfortable obsession with Chris was based, according to Henry, on an old man he used to see at a grocery store. Fact 19. The original voice of Meg Griffin was not Mila Kunis. For the first season of the show, Meg was voiced by Lacey Chabert, who was at the time best known for her role as Claudia on the dramatic television series Party of Five. Chabert stepped away from the role after the first production season. She has said in interviews that she chose to leave because Party of Five was demanding so much of her time and energy that she could not manage both commitments simultaneously. There was no drama, no falling out. She simply had too much on her plate. Mila Kunis, who was then best known for playing Jackie on That 70s Show, auditioned for and won the role. Kunis was 17 years old when she got the part. Alex Borstein, who voices Lois, temporarily covered Meg's lines during the table reads while the replacement process was underway. Fact 20. Seth Green, who voices Chris Griffin, arrived at his audition with an impression no one expected him to use. He had been talking with his friend Charlie Korsmo the night before the audition. Korsmo was a fellow actor he had appeared with in the 1998 film Can't Hardly Wait. The two of them started fooling around with the voice of Buffalo Bill, the serial killer played by Ted Levine in The Silence of the Lambs. Cosmo dared Green to go into the audition doing the Buffalo Bill voice. Green took the dare. He walked into the room and performed the Chris Griffin audition in an impression of a fictional serial killer. The casting directors liked it. MacFarlane, reportedly, was visibly unsettled by it but ultimately gave Green the part. Chris Griffin is, technically speaking, voiced as an 11-year-old version of one of cinema's most disturbing characters. The show later acknowledged this directly in a Season 7 episode where Chris reenacted Buffalo Bill's infamous dancing scene in front of a mirror. Fact 21. Alex Borstein, who voices Lois, is a veteran of the sketch comedy show MAD-TV. She was part of the main cast there before Family Guy came along. MacFarlane had actually encountered her work before casting her as Lois, which made the audition process somewhat natural. Borstein is also known for going far outside her comfort zone in the role. She has described Lois's voice as one that requires a particular kind of physical commitment. It lives in a specific part of the throat and requires consistent tension to maintain over long recording sessions. Borstein is also the only main cast member to have won a Primetime Emmy for a performance outside of Family Guy. She won multiple Emmys for her role in The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. Fact 22. Patrick Warburton, who voices Joe Swanson, the wheelchair-bound police officer who lives next door to the Griffins, is one of the most recognizable voices in American animation. He voices Kronk in The Emperor's New Groove, Brock Sampson in The Venture Bros, and dozens of other characters across decades of animation and advertising work. His voice has a quality that is hard to describe but instantly recognizable, deep, measured, with a faint undercurrent of seriousness that makes it funny in comedic contexts. For Joe Swanson, Warburton plays the character straight, which is precisely what makes Joe's increasingly absurd situations so entertaining. Warburton never winks at the camera. He delivers every line as if Joe Swanson's circumstances are completely normal. Drop a comment right now and let me know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. It keeps these kinds of long, detailed, relaxing deep dives coming. Now, back to the facts. Number. Section 2. The character's hidden depths and forgotten details. Every character on Family Guy started as a sketch in someone's notebook, a voice in someone's head, a personality that needed to be built one brick at a time. And every single one of them has a history that extends far beyond what you see in the finished episodes. There are design choices, name origins, personality decisions, and in-universe details that most fans have never thought to look up. Let's slow down and go through them properly. Fact 23. Stewie Griffin is exactly 1 year and 9 months old. That is his canonical age within the show. He is, to be precise, 1 3/4 years old. The writers have been remarkably consistent about this detail across the show's run, even as everything else about Stewie's character evolved dramatically. He is a toddler. He has all the physical vulnerabilities of a toddler. He still uses diapers and sleeps in a crib. He just also happens to be capable of constructing functional time machines and directing professional theatrical productions. Fact 24. Stewie does not have a canonical birthday. The writers have intentionally left this unspecified. The explanation offered by the production team is that pinning down Stewie's birthday would create continuity problems that the show preferred to avoid. If Stewie had a specific birthday that fell in, say, March, then every spring episode would need to address or acknowledge that fact. By leaving the birthday undefined, the writers gave themselves flexibility. This is actually a very common strategy in long-running television, deliberately leaving certain character details vague to prevent the story from boxing itself in. Fact 25. Stewie's head shape is unique among all the characters on the show. No other Griffin family member has that distinctive, elongated, almost football-shaped skull. The shape was a deliberate design choice meant to signal that Stewie is different, not just intellectually, but physically. He exists slightly apart from his family, and his visual design reflects that. The writers have never offered an in-universe explanation for why Stewie's head is shaped the way it is. Some fans have theorized it represents his advanced brain development. Others believe it is simply a visual shorthand for his alien quality. The show has made jokes about the head shape over the years without ever committing to an explanation. Fact 26. Stewie's first words on the show, spoken in the very first episode to ever air, were directed at Lois. He looked up at her and said, "Damn you, vile woman." This was the first thing the character ever said out loud. It set the tone immediately and completely. The show did not ease the audience into Stewie's personality. It dropped them directly into the deep end. Fact 27. The question of whether the other characters can understand Stewie has been one of the most inconsistently handled elements of the entire series. The writers have given two completely different answers to this question at different points in the show's run, and the most honest answer they have ever given is the following. Whether Stewie can be understood by those around him depends entirely on what is funnier in any given scene. If it is funnier for a character to respond to Stewie, then they respond to Stewie. If it is funnier for them to ignore him, then they ignore him. There is no consistent rule. The show applies whatever logic serves the joke. Fact 28. In the first season, almost every other character in the show treated Stewie as if they could hear him talking but were choosing to ignore him. This was a slightly different setup than the later approach. The early Stewie existed in a world where people sensed his dark intelligence but could not quite process it. It created a different kind of comedy than what came later, more unsettling, more based on the dramatic irony of a baby being actively dangerous in a world full of adults too distracted to notice. Fact 29. Stewie's teddy bear, Rupert, has been with the character since the earliest episodes. Rupert is named and is treated by Stewie with a devotion that borders on religious. In Stewie's imagination and in his private moments, Rupert is fully real, a companion, a confidant, an emotional anchor. The bear was introduced partly to give the evil genius baby a softer quality that would prevent him from being entirely unlikable. A character who loves his stuffed animal has a vulnerability that makes him sympathetic even when he is plotting murder. Fact 30. Brian Griffin's full name is Brian H. Griffin. The H has never been given a full name within the show. This is another example of the writers deliberately leaving a detail incomplete to preserve creative flexibility. Some fans have speculated that the H stands for something embarrassing or unsuitable for the character, which is why it has never been revealed. Others think it was simply a placeholder that nobody ever got around to filling in. Brian's relationship with alcohol, he drinks martinis constantly, was established in the very first episode and has remained one of his defining characteristics across the entire run. His alcoholism is played partly for comedy and partly, in the more thoughtful episodes, as a genuine character flaw that he is unable to address. Fact 31. Brian was originally conceived as the most intelligent member of the Griffin household. His role in the early seasons was to be the one adult in the room, the character who could look at the chaos around him, understand it clearly, and respond to it with dry wit rather than participation. He was the audience surrogate. The writers wanted viewers to feel like they had a representative inside the show, someone who was thinking what they were thinking. This is why Brian's eventual transformation in the later seasons hit fans so hard they lost not just a character but their own stand-in within the story. Fact 32. Meg Griffin's full first name is not Megan. This surprises a lot of people. Her name is simply Meg, not short for anything, just Meg. The show established this clearly in an episode where the question was directly addressed. People assume Meg is a nickname, but within the show's continuity, it is her actual legal name. Fact 33. Meg's character was deliberately designed to be the most ordinary member of an extraordinary family. The original creative logic was that having a completely normal, unspectacular teenage girl in the middle of all the Griffin family's strangeness would be inherently funny. She was the straight man. She was the person who just wanted normal things while everything around her was absurd. The comedy was supposed to come from her normalcy existing in contrast to everything else. That creative intention was largely abandoned as the show progressed, with disastrous results for the character. Fact 34. The character of Bonnie Swanson, Joe's wife, was pregnant on the show for 7 years. Not 7 years in the show's fictional timeline, 7 actual real-world years of production. She became pregnant at some point early in the series, and the writers simply never resolved the pregnancy. It went on for so long that it became a running joke rather than a plot point. Joe and Bonnie's son Susie was eventually born in the season 7 episode Baby Not on Board. By that point, Bonnie had been pregnant for 116 episodes. The writers have never given a clear explanation for why they let this go on so long. The most common behind-the-scenes theory is simply that nobody wanted to deal with the complications of introducing a baby character alongside the already complicated Stewie. Fact 35. Quagmire's age, according to his driver's license, is given as a birth year of 1948. This means that within the show's continuity, Quagmire is in his late 60s or early 70s for most of the show's run. He looks and acts like a man in his 30s or 40s. The show is fully aware of this contradiction and has made jokes about it. It is one of those details that rewards the careful viewer. You can actually see his license in an episode if you pause at the right moment, and the birth year is visible. Fact 36. Glenn Quagmire's name went through multiple iterations before the writers settled on it. The surname Quagmire was chosen partly for its comedic weight. It suggests getting stuck in something, being mired down, which works as a dark joke about his romantic habits. The name Glenn was chosen because it has a slightly old-fashioned, mid-century American quality that fits with the character's voice and visual design being based on 1940s and 1950s aesthetics. Fact 37. Carter Pewterschmidt, Lois's wealthy father, shares the exact same voice as Dr. Hartman, the Griffin family's doctor. Both characters are voiced by Seth MacFarlane, and MacFarlane uses the same voice for both without distinguishing them at all. The show noticed this inconsistency itself and actually made it into a joke in the episode Believe It or Not, Joe's Walking on Air, where a character draws attention to the fact that the two sound identical. MacFarlane then had both characters appear in the same scene and confront each other about sounding the same. Fact 38. Neil Goldman, the nerdy classmate who has an unrequited obsession with Meg, is named after a real person. The character is named after one of the show's actual writers, a man named Neil Goldman, who served as a writer and producer on Family Guy in its early seasons. The writers often named minor characters after themselves or their colleagues. It is a common practice in animation writing rooms, a small inside joke that most of the audience will never know they are in on. Fact 39. The character of Consuela, the Spanish-speaking cleaning woman who appears occasionally and responds to almost everything with no, was based on a real cleaning woman who worked at the Family Guy production offices. The writers found her particular conversational style, a gentle but firm refusal to engage with the chaos around her, so funny that they animated her into the show. This practice of basing background characters on real people connected to the production is actually quite common on the show. Fact 40. Joe Swanson was introduced in the very first season, in an episode titled A Hero Sits Next Door. When Joe was first introduced, he was framed as the cool new neighbor, the guy everyone else on the street admired, feared a little, and wanted to impress. He was in a wheelchair because of an injury sustained in the line of duty as a police officer, but the wheelchair was never framed as a limitation. In the early seasons, Joe was the most physically capable, emotionally stable, and professionally impressive person on the block. Peter was openly jealous of him. The contrast between Joe's competence and Peter's chaos was the basis of their early dynamic. Fact 41. Chris Griffin's character was built around a single concept. What would it look like if a gentle, sweet-natured teenage boy had the body of a grown adult? Chris is physically large, he takes after his father in build, but emotionally he is sensitive, kind, and genuinely good-hearted in ways that the rest of the family sometimes is not. Seth Green has spoken about how important it was to him to play Chris as genuinely innocent rather than simply dumb. Chris is not stupid in the way Peter is stupid. He is young. He has not been exposed to enough of the world to be cynical yet. The distinction matters, and it is why Chris has remained one of the more sympathetic Griffin family members across the entire run of the show. Fact 42. Lois Griffin's maiden name is Pewterschmidt, and she is the daughter of one of the wealthiest men in Rhode Island. This creates a permanent irony in her situation. She could have lived a life of extraordinary privilege, but instead chose to marry Peter and live in a middle-class house on Spooner Street. The early seasons played this detail as a source of quiet dignity for Lois. She was not stuck in her life. She chose it. She loved Peter before he became what he later became, and she has been trying to hold the household together ever since. Her family background also provides the show with a recurring source of social satire, contrasting old-money New England wealth with Peter's working-class sensibility. Fact 43. MacFarlane's own sister, Rachel MacFarlane, has appeared on Family Guy multiple times as a voice actor. She has been cast in various recurring and guest roles over the years. She is also a voice actor in her own right, having worked on American Dad and various other animated projects. The MacFarlane siblings working together in the same medium is a detail that most fans of the show are unaware of. Fact 44. The Death character, the literal personification of death who appears in several episodes, was originally planned to appear in every single episode of the show. The early creative team wanted Death to be a recurring fixture, always lurking in the background of the Griffin family's life, occasionally interacting with them but mostly just present. The idea was abandoned partly because it proved logistically complicated to weave into unrelated storylines, and partly because the character lost some of his comedic punch the more often he appeared. Fact 45. Lois's speaking voice was inspired in part by the speaking style of actress and comedian Marcia Wallace, who was best known for voicing Mrs. Krabappel on The Simpsons. Alex Borstein has cited Wallace as an influence on the warmth and exasperation she brings to Lois, a quality of a woman who is holding the line against forces she cannot fully control, maintaining her good humor through sheer force of will. Fact 46. Herbert the pederast, the elderly neighbor who makes no secret of his uncomfortable interest in Chris Griffin, is based on a real person. Mike Henry, who voices Herbert, has described an old man he used to encounter at a grocery store who had a very particular slow, wheezing quality to his voice and a vaguely unsettling manner. The character of Herbert was built around that voice and that manner, then pushed into territory that the real man certainly would not recognize. Henry does Herbert's voice without being asked. Cast members who work with him on DVD commentaries have noted that he will slip into Herbert's voice spontaneously, which is deeply unnerving when it happens unexpectedly. Section 3. The cancellations, the comeback, and the cult following. Family Guy holds a distinction that almost no other show in television history can claim. It is the first series ever to be brought back from cancellation, primarily because of the combined force of home media sales and cable rerun ratings. No social media campaign. No fan petition. Just an enormous quantity of people buying DVDs and a cable network noticing that reruns of a dead show were crushing their competition every night. The story of how Family Guy came back from the dead is genuinely remarkable, and it contains facts that are strange enough to seem made up. Fact 47. Fox canceled Family Guy for the first time not after the third season, as most people assume, but actually after the second season. The show was pulled from the schedule after Season 2 aired, which caused a gap during what should have been Season 3's production window. This first cancellation was relatively brief, however, and Fox eventually reversed the decision and allowed the show to return for a third season. Most casual fans are unaware this first cancellation happened because it was resolved without much public drama. The cancellation that people remember, the one that stuck, came after Season 3 ended in 2002. Fact 48. When Fox tried to sell the syndication rights to Family Guy reruns after the second cancellation, they could not find any buyers. Every network they approached turned them down. The show was considered worthless in the rerun market. Cartoon Network then approached Fox and asked to buy the rights. Fox, having been rejected everywhere else, sold the rights to Cartoon Network for an amount that was, by all accounts, extremely low. Cartoon Network got what may have been one of the best deals in cable television history. Fact 49. Family Guy reruns began airing on Adult Swim Cartoon Network's late-night programming block for adult-oriented content on the 20th of April, 2003. The timing was significant. Adult Swim was still a relatively young programming block. It had launched in 2001 and was still building its identity. The arrival of Family Guy gave it an enormous boost. Within a very short period of time, Family Guy became the highest-rated program on the entire Adult Swim schedule. It was beating cable competition and even some broadcast competition in its late-night time slot. The show had been canceled because not enough people were watching it on Fox on Sunday nights. It turned out the problem had never been the show. It was the time slot and the scheduling. Fact 50. The boost that Family Guy gave to Adult Swim's viewership was calculated at 239%. That is not a typo. The network's viewership nearly tripled because of a show that Fox had thrown away for almost nothing. Fact 51. The DVD releases of Family Guy's first and second seasons arrived in stores on the same week that the show premiered on Adult Swim. This was not entirely a coincidence. The releases were coordinated as part of the strategy to capitalize on renewed interest. But nobody quite anticipated how well both would do simultaneously. The Season 1 and 2 DVD set sold more than 2.2 million copies. It became the best-selling television DVD of 2003. The only TV show that year whose DVD outsold Family Guy was the first season of Chappelle's Show on Comedy Central. Fact 52. The third season DVD set also sold more than 1 million copies. At this point, Fox was watching a show they had thrown away generate enormous ongoing revenue for the DVD market. The business logic of bringing the show back became increasingly hard to ignore. A canceled show with these kinds of sales numbers and these kinds of cable ratings was not actually canceled in any meaningful sense. It was alive, it just was not on Fox. Fact 53. Family Guy was technically canceled a third time. The WGA strike of 2023 resulted in production shutting down, and the show entered a period of indefinite hiatus. MacFarlane and the showrunners made clear they would not work during the strike. This third cancellation was the shortest of the three, as the strike was resolved and production resumed. Fact 54. Fox ordered new episodes of Family Guy in 2004, after roughly 2 years of watching it dominate Adult Swim. The fourth season premiere aired on the 1st of May 2005. It drew approximately 11.85 million viewers, according to contemporary reporting, which was an extraordinary number for a show returning from the dead. Fans who had been watching reruns on Adult Swim for 2 years showed up in enormous numbers for the comeback. The return of Family Guy was one of the most talked-about television events of 2005. Fact 55. Family Guy is the first television series in history to be revived specifically because of DVD sales. This is a genuine first in the medium. Before Family Guy, the idea that a canceled show could be brought back because of the commercial performance of its home media releases did not exist as a proven model. After Family Guy did it, the strategy became part of the television industry's thinking. Networks began paying attention to DVD performance as a metric of a show's actual audience, even when live ratings were poor. Fact 56. The unaired episode from Season 3, an episode that Fox had completed but never broadcast before the cancellation, eventually aired on Adult Swim in 2003. The episode was called When You Wish Upon a Weinstein. Fox had pulled the episode at the last minute before the original cancellation, fearing that its content about Jewish stereotypes and religious conversion would be perceived as anti-Semitic. The episode sat on a shelf for over a year before Adult Swim aired it. When it finally aired, the controversy Fox had anticipated largely did not materialize. Critics found the episode's satire more nuanced than Fox had given it credit for. Fact 57. The Season 4 premiere episode was titled North by North Quahog, a reference to the Cary Grant film North by Northwest, and it aired 3 years after the previous season had ended. 3 years is an extraordinarily long gap in primetime television. The writing staff had largely scattered. Many of the original writers had moved on to other projects. When Family Guy returned, it was not entirely the same show that had left, because it was not entirely the same creative team that had made it. This is one of the central facts of Family Guy's history, that fans sometimes overlook. The revival was not a simple resumption. It was a reconstruction. Fact 58. During the years that Family Guy was off the air, Seth MacFarlane developed and launched American Dad, which premiered on February 6, 2005, just a few months before Family Guy returned. MacFarlane used the hiatus productively, creating a new show while waiting to see if the old one would come back. The fact that both shows ended up airing on the same night, on the same network, in the same animation domination block, is one of the stranger footnotes in network television programming history. Fact 59. The Season 4 premiere of Family Guy aired alongside The Simpsons, American Dad, and King of the Hill as part of Fox's Sunday animation domination lineup. Fox used the occasion to make a significant promotional push. The return of Family Guy was heavily advertised. Fox recognized that they had a second chance with a show they had previously given up on, and they were not going to squander it through poor promotion this time. Fact 60. The Stewie Griffin, the untold story direct-to-DVD film, released in 2005, was constructed from 3 completed episodes that had originally been intended for Season 4. The episodes were edited together and released as a movie rather than as individual broadcast episodes. This is why the episode count for Season 4 can vary depending on the source. Fox does not count these episodes in the official Season 4 tally, while other databases do. The DVD is available separately and is considered by many fans to be a standalone entry in the Family Guy canon. Number Section 4. The voice cast secrets, surprises, and side stories. The people behind the microphones on Family Guy have stories that are as interesting as anything the show itself has ever produced. The cast is dominated by a small group of remarkably versatile performers who have spent decades building their careers in voice work, sketch comedy, and live-action performance. And the connections between them, the rivalries between them, and the strange circumstances under which some of them joined the show are worth sitting with in detail. Fact 61. Seth MacFarlane won a Primetime Emmy Award in 2000 for Outstanding Character Voiceover Performance for his portrayal of Stewie Griffin. This was in only the show's first year on the air. The Emmy recognized the performance specifically rather than the show broadly, which was significant because it positioned the voice work itself as the primary creative achievement. MacFarlane would go on to win multiple Emmys in this category over the years. Fact 62. The Family Guy cast makes between $175,000 and $225,000 per episode. This information was reported publicly during various contract negotiations over the years. For context, a standard television season of Family Guy contains somewhere between 18 and 22 episodes, which means the main cast members are earning somewhere between $3.15 million and $4.95 million per season from the show alone. This is before any income from other projects, appearances, or endorsements. Fact 63. The cast has been involved in various contract disputes with Fox over the years. The most significant of these occurred in 2019 and 2020, when the main cast negotiated significant pay increases as part of their contract renewals. The details of those negotiations were not made fully public, but the cast emerged with substantially improved terms that reflected the show's enormous value in streaming and syndication. Fact 64. Mila Kunis was 17 years old when she first auditioned for the role of Meg Griffin. She lied about her age during the audition process. When asked if she was 18, she answered that she would be, which was technically true in the sense that she would eventually turn 18, just not imminently. The producers chose her for the role before anyone investigated the age discrepancy. By the time the show was in full production, she was close enough to 18 that the issue resolved itself naturally. Fact 65. Several major celebrities have appeared on Family Guy playing themselves, including James Woods, who has appeared multiple times across many seasons playing a heightened, comedic version of himself. The James Woods appearances became one of the show's most beloved recurring bits. Woods' willingness to participate in jokes at his own expense was remarkable given the nature of some of those jokes, which were not flattering. He has spoken publicly about enjoying the experience of playing himself as a comic villain. Fact 66. The full Star Trek, The Next Generation cast appeared on Family Guy in an episode called Not All Dogs Go to Heaven, which aired in Season 7. Patrick Stewart, Jonathan Frakes, Brent Spiner, LeVar Burton, Michael Dorn, Gates McFadden, and Marina Sirtis all appeared as themselves, voicing their own characters during a sequence at a Star Trek convention. The willingness of the entire main cast of The Next Generation to participate was partly a product of the show's enormous cultural reach by that point, and partly a reflection of the fact that MacFarlane is genuinely and passionately interested in Star Trek. Fact 67. MacFarlane's love for Star Trek goes beyond television fandom. He is close personal friends with several members of the Star Trek community and has been actively involved in advocacy for the franchise. He played a significant role in efforts to preserve the original series' film materials. His science fiction series, The Orville, which premiered in 2017, is heavily influenced by The Next Generation and has been described by MacFarlane as the show he always wanted to make a sincere, optimistic science fiction drama in the tradition of classic Trek. Fact 68. Rush Limbaugh appeared on Family Guy multiple times, most notably in the Blue Harvest Star Wars special and in other episodes throughout the show's run. Limbaugh's appearances are notable because the show is generally politically left-leaning, and his character was often positioned as a conservative foil. The fact that Limbaugh agreed to participate in episodes that were not always flattering to his ideological positions is a testament to his understanding of how the show operated and possibly also to his publicist's advice. Fact 69. Tom Brady has appeared on Family Guy. The former New England Patriots quarterback, who spent most of his career in New England not far from the show's fictional setting in Rhode Island, appeared in a cameo role. Brady's willingness to play along with the show's irreverent humor was consistent with his public persona throughout his career. He was always more comfortable with self-deprecation than many athletes of his stature. Fact 70. In Season 7, an episode titled Family Gay featured Seth Rogen, lending his voice to a brief sequence where Peter Griffin is treated with what the show calls the Seth Rogen gene as part of a medical experiment. For the duration of the experiment's effect, Peter's voice is replaced entirely by Seth Rogen's own voice, and he begins behaving in ways consistent with Seth Rogen's comedic persona. This kind of momentary voice replacement, where a guest actor literally voices a main character, is unusual in animation, and the episode used it as the central joke of the sequence. Fact 71. During DVD commentary sessions for the early seasons, MacFarlane would spontaneously break into the voices of Peter, Stewie, Brian, and Quagmire without being prompted. Alex Borstein and Seth Green would follow him into their characters. Mike Henry would do his Cleveland and Herbert voices without even being asked. Cast members who recorded commentaries with him noted that he would slip into the Herbert voice mid-conversation. In later DVD sets, MacFarlane reversed his approach and firmly refused to do any of his character voices during commentary, responding to any requests with mock threats. The evolution of his relationship with those voices across the DVD releases mirrors the evolution of his relationship with the show itself. Fact 72. Frank Sinatra Jr. appeared as himself on Family Guy and became a recurring character on the show. He performed alongside the Griffin family in musical sequences and appeared in multiple episodes over several seasons before his death in 2016. MacFarlane's genuine love of the Rat Pack era of American music, big band, jazz, lounge, made the connection between him and Sinatra Jr. natural. MacFarlane has recorded several albums of big band and jazz standards himself, drawing on the same musical tradition that Sinatra Jr. represented. Fact 73. Carrie Fisher appeared on Family Guy as the voice of Peter's therapist, Dr. Jennifer Sharp. Fisher's distinctive voice and her willingness to engage with the show's irreverent tone made her a natural fit. She appeared in multiple episodes before her death in December 2016. MacFarlane has spoken warmly about Fisher's participation and about her general approach to her work, which he described as entirely unbothered and completely unsentimental. Fact 74. Adam West appeared on Family Guy as a fictionalized version of himself, the Mayor Adam West, who serves as the mayor of the show's fictional Rhode Island city. West played this character across many seasons, appearing in dozens of episodes. The joke was that the actual Adam West, the actor famous for playing Batman in the 1960s television series, was the mayor of a small Rhode Island city and was deeply strange. West embraced the absurdity completely, delivering his lines with magnificent deadpan commitment. He continued voicing Mayor Adam West until his death in June 2017. Fact 75. After Adam West's death, the show addressed his absence in a season 16 episode titled Adam West High, which served as a tribute to the actor. The episode featured archival audio of West that the production team had retained from previous recording sessions. His death was acknowledged within the show's fictional world. Mayor Adam West died in the show as well, and the episode served as the show's way of honoring the man who had been part of its cast for so many years. It was one of the more genuinely moving things the show produced in its later seasons. Number Section 5. Behind-the-scenes writers, production, and the room. Animation is often discussed as if the important creative people are the animators and the actors. But on Family Guy, as on most animated comedies, the real engine of the show is the writing room. The people who sit around a table every day, generating jokes, arguing about character choices, breaking stories, and figuring out how to fill 22 minutes with enough humor to justify everyone's time, those are the people whose decisions shape everything else. Fact 76. The original Family Guy writing staff assembled by MacFarlane included several people who would go on to become significant figures in the television industry. Chris Sheridan went on to create other animated properties. Gary Janetti became a television writer and producer with his own successful career, eventually creating the animated series The Prince for HBO Max. Danny Smith remained with Family Guy for decades and became one of the most consistent presences in the writing room. Neil Goldman and Garrett Donovan worked on the show's early seasons before going on to write for Community and other series. Ricky Blitt also contributed to the early creative foundation. The original room was stacked with genuine talent. Fact 77. The writing process for an episode of Family Guy begins months before the episode airs. Writers pitch story ideas in the room, and the best ones are developed into outlines. The outlines are broken down into acts, then scenes, then individual jokes. The show is famous for what the writing staff calls pitch-outs, where writers sit in the room and pitch jokes for specific moments. The room votes on what stays and what goes. A joke that does not get a laugh in the pitch room usually does not make it into the final episode. This is a more democratic process than many writing rooms use. Fact 78. The show has always run with more writers than most animated comedies of comparable length. A typical Family Guy season has had a writing staff of anywhere from 12 to 20 people, which is large for animation. The large staff is necessary partly because of the show's format. The cutaway gag structure means that a single episode might require 2 or 3 times as many individual jokes as a conventionally structured comedy episode would. Filling all those cutaways with something that is actually funny requires a lot of people generating a lot of material. Fact 79. MacFarlane himself acknowledged in a 2011 interview with The Hollywood Reporter that he had come to feel, by that point, that 7 seasons was roughly the ideal lifespan for a television series like Family Guy. He was relatively open about the fact that the show had gone on longer than he thought it should have. He said he wished it had ended after 7 seasons. This was a remarkable thing for the creator of a still-running show to say publicly, and it generated significant coverage at the time. Fact 80. The writers of Family Guy have included a number of people from very different comedy backgrounds. Some came from sketch comedy. Some came from stand-up. Some came from literary backgrounds, people who had studied creative writing academically and brought a more structured approach to the storytelling. The diversity of backgrounds in the room created a show that could move between very different kinds of comedy: broad physical slapstick in one scene, dry character-based wit in the next, experimental absurdism in the scene after that. Fact 81. One of the most unusual aspects of the show's production is the way it handles its musical sequences. Family Guy regularly features original songs, many of them written specifically for individual episodes. These songs are composed and recorded with full orchestral accompaniment, and they go through multiple rounds of revision just like the dialogue. MacFarlane's genuine musical ability is a major part of this process. He is trained as a singer and can assess musical performances and arrangements in a way that most television producers cannot. Fact 82. The show won an Emmy for Outstanding Music and Lyrics in 2002 for a song called You've Got a Lot to See, which was performed in the episode Brian Wallows and Peter's Swallows. The episode centered on Brian caring for an elderly woman he has become attached to, and the song served as a kind of tour through everything she had missed during her years of isolation. It is one of the more genuinely beautiful musical moments in the show's history. The Emmy win confirmed that the show's music was being taken seriously, even by those who were ambivalent about its humor. Fact 83. The show has used Walter Murphy as its primary composer across most of its run. Murphy is a legendary figure in American music. He is best known for composing A Fifth of Beethoven, the disco arrangement of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony that became a major hit in the 1970s and was featured prominently in Saturday Night Fever. Having him as the show's composer gives Family Guy a musical sophistication that is easy to overlook when the show's content is particularly crude. Fact 84. Ron Jones composed music for early seasons of Family Guy before being let go by the production team. Jones was known for his work on Star Trek: The Next Generation, which he scored across its entire run. He has spoken somewhat openly about his disappointment at being replaced. His departure was part of a broader shift in the show's production approach in its revival seasons. Fact 85. The show's DVD commentary tracks, which are available on the season box sets, have become legendary among hardcore fans for their candor and strangeness. Writers discuss jokes that did not work. Cast members argue about performance choices. MacFarlane sometimes breaks into his character voices without warning, then refuses to do it again when asked directly. Animators comment on technical details that most viewers would never notice. The commentary tracks are essentially their own separate art form at this point. Fact 86. Family Guy has a remarkably detailed style guide that governs how every character is drawn, the exact proportions of their heads, the specific colors used for their clothing, the way their expressions work. This style guide exists because the show is animated at multiple studios simultaneously, and without strict guidelines, subtle inconsistencies would creep in from one episode to the next. The style guide is updated periodically as the character designs evolve, and copies of different versions of it constitute a visual history of how the show's look has changed across its run. Fact 87. The Simpsons and Family Guy have had a famously complicated relationship over the decades. On one level, they are competitors, both animated comedies airing on Fox on Sunday nights, occupying the same space in the television landscape and theoretically fishing from the same pond of viewers. On another level, they have been mutually supportive. When Family Guy was canceled, some Simpsons writers reportedly lobbied to have it brought back. The two shows also directly crossed over in a 2014 episode titled The Simpsons Guy, which featured the Griffin family meeting the Simpsons family. The episode was one of the most watched animated crossover events in television history. Fact 88. Seth MacFarlane said in an interview that he was specifically motivated in pitching Family Guy to Fox by his desire to create a show that was distinct from The Simpsons, not a copy of it. He wanted to do something that could exist alongside The Simpsons without being mistaken for it. The approach he landed on the cutaway gag format, the more surreal humor, the character of Stewie was deliberately different from The Simpsons' approach. Whether he fully succeeded in creating a distinct voice is a debate that has run for decades in animation criticism. Fact 89. South Park's creators, Trey Parker and Matt Stone, used their show to deliver one of the most famous attacks on Family Guy's writing style in 2006. In a two-part episode of South Park titled Cartoon Wars, the show depicted Family Guy's jokes as being generated by manatees randomly pushing balls with different ideas written on them, suggesting that Family Guy's cutaway gags are entirely random and require no actual creative skill. Parker and Stone were openly hostile about Family Guy's comedic approach. After those episodes aired, Parker and Stone received phone calls from writers on both The Simpsons and King of the Hill thanking them for making the episodes. Fact 90. MacFarlane has mostly declined to respond directly to South Park's criticism, which is itself a notable choice. He has occasionally acknowledged that he understood what Parker and Stone were saying, and has been somewhat philosophical about the fact that two different comedy shows might have fundamentally different approaches to what makes something funny. The relationship between Family Guy and South Park is one of the more entertaining minor dramas in the history of adult animation. Number. Section 6. The episodes banned, controversial, and legendary. Some television shows produce one or two episodes in their entire run that cause genuine controversy. Family Guy has produced so many controversial episodes that it has a category of its own. Some were pulled from the air, some were banned entirely, some were responsible for diplomatic incidents, and a few of them are genuinely considered among the greatest pieces of animated television ever produced. Fact 91. The episode Partial Terms of Endearment is the only Family Guy episode to have never aired on American television. The episode, which was written by Danny Smith and aired in the United Kingdom on BBC Three on the 20th of June 2010, deals with the topic of surrogacy and, by extension, abortion. Fox refused to broadcast it in the United States before it was even completed. The decision to ban the episode was announced publicly at San Diego Comic-Con in 2009, while the season was still in production. Fox executive Kevin Reilly acknowledged that the subject matter had been handled well, but said the episode felt like it could cause trouble and was not worth the risk. MacFarlane publicly disagreed with the decision, saying the ban was the result of people's inability to engage with controversial narratives maturely. The episode is available on the Season 8 DVD set. It reached approximately 1 million homes in the United Kingdom when it aired there and received positive reviews. Fact 92. When You Wish Upon a Weinstein was originally intended to air in 2000 during Season 2. Fox pulled it at the last minute, fearing the episode would be perceived as anti-Semitic. The episode actually makes fun of anti-Semitism rather than promoting it, but Fox was not willing to take the risk at that moment in the show's history. The episode eventually aired in 2003, after the show had moved to Adult Swim. By the time it aired, much of the feared controversy had evaporated. Fact 93. The Season 11 episode Turban Cowboy was pulled from rotation after the Boston Marathon bombing in April 2013. The episode, which had aired earlier that year in March, included a subplot about Peter becoming friends with a man who turns out to be a terrorist, and also featured an unrelated cutaway gag that involved a graphic scene of a car driving through a crowd at a road race. After the bombing, Fox stopped airing the episode out of respect for the victims, and the episode was also removed from streaming platforms for a period of time. Fact 94. Family Guy has been banned in Venezuela. In 2009, the Venezuelan government reacted negatively to the show's portrayal of marijuana use in the Season 7 episode 420. Venezuela's then-Justice Minister cited the episode as evidence of American media promoting drug use, and cable stations in the country were warned they would face fines if they continued to air the show. It is one of the only animated television series to have generated a formal government response from a foreign nation. Fact 95. The episode Back to the Pilot, which aired in Season 10, features Brian and Stewie traveling back in time to the events of the very first episode of the show. The episode includes a subplot in which Brian decides to prevent the 11th of September 2001 attacks by warning authorities, and the episode explores the consequences of doing so. The consequences are shown to be worse than the original events. The episode was controversial for obvious reasons, and MacFarlane, who had personal proximity to the attacks, was directly involved in its development. It was one of the stranger creative decisions of the show's run. Fact 96. An earlier Family Guy episode from 2000 called Road to Rhode Island included a cutaway gag featuring Osama bin Laden. The gag depicted bin Laden going through airport security. At the time, this was simply a joke about a known terrorist. After the 11th of September 2001, the gag was removed from the episode for the DVD release. It has since been restored in some versions of the episode. The existence of a Family Guy joke about bin Laden at an airport from 2000 is one of those details that hits differently with historical knowledge. Fact 97. The episode titled And Then There Were Fewer, which opened Season 9, was a full-length Agatha Christie-style murder mystery set in a mansion. It featured a large cast of characters, many of whom were killed off during the episode. It was nominated for 3 Emmy Awards in 2011. The episode was ambitious in a way that was unusual for the show. It committed fully to the genre of the mystery thriller and used the characters effectively within that framework. It is consistently cited among the best episodes the show has ever produced. Fact 98. The Road to episodes which feature Brian and Stewie going on adventures together, named as a series of references to the Bob Hope and Bing Crosby Road to. Film series from the 1940s are generally considered the most consistently excellent output of the show's post-revival run. These episodes gave the writers freedom to place the characters in completely different environments, while maintaining the character dynamic that fans responded to most strongly. Road to the Multiverse, which aired in Season 8, is often cited as one of the greatest individual episodes of the entire series. It features Brian and Stewie traveling through alternate versions of reality, each one animated in a completely different visual style. Fact 99. Road to the Multiverse includes a sequence animated entirely in the style of a Disney animated feature film, with full musical numbers and lush visual detail. Getting permission to parody Disney's animation style was a significant undertaking, and the production team committed fully to making the sequence work as a genuine parody rather than a lazy approximation. The sequence is technically impressive. The animators had to learn and then replicate an entire visual language that Family Guy normally never uses. Fact 100. The episode Brian and Stewie, which aired in Season 8, contains no cutaway gags at all. The entire episode takes place in a bank vault, where Brian and Stewie have accidentally been locked overnight. The episode is simply 2 characters talking to each other for 22 minutes. Within those conversations, Brian reveals that he keeps a loaded gun in a safety deposit box because he has considered ending his own life. The episode deals with themes of depression, friendship, and vulnerability in ways that Family Guy almost never attempted. It won universal critical praise and is considered by many critics to be the single finest episode the show ever produced. Fact 101. The Season 6 2-part episode Stewie Kills Lois and Lois Kills Stewie gave Stewie the chance to finally accomplish his stated primary goal, killing his mother. The episode follows through on 7 years of setup and delivers a version of the scenario that the audience had been promised since the very first episode. It is dramatically satisfying, funny, and tense in ways that the show rarely achieved. The twist ending, which revealed that everything had happened in a Stewie computer simulation, was both clever and slightly disappointing. Clever because it was unexpected, disappointing because it meant none of it actually counted. Fact 102. Life of Brian. The Season 12 episode in which Brian is hit by a car and killed made national news headlines and trended on social media platforms for several days after it aired. The show treated Brian's death with genuine emotional weight. The family grieved. Stewie was devastated. A new dog named Vinny, voiced by Tony Sirico from The Sopranos, was introduced as Brian's replacement. The response from the audience was intense. Some fans were genuinely heartbroken. Others were furious. The controversy generated enormous attention for the show. Fact 103. Brian was resurrected just 2 episodes later in the Christmas episode Christmas Guy. Stewie uses a time travel device to prevent Brian from being hit by the car. The resurrection was almost universally received as a rating stunt critics, and fans pointed out that killing Brian and bringing him back within a single month made the death meaningless. The show's willingness to kill and immediately revive a character confirmed a pattern that fans had long noticed. Major events happened in Family Guy, but nothing was ever truly permanent. Fact 104. George Lucas gave Family Guy explicit permission to parody Star Wars. The two parties negotiated an arrangement, and Lucas was reportedly involved in reviewing the finished Blue Harvest episode. The one requirement that Lucasfilm made was that the characters from Star Wars, the vehicles, the environments, the costumes had to look exactly as they do in the actual films. The Family Guy production team honored this request meticulously, recreating the visual language of the original trilogy with remarkable accuracy within the show's animated style. Lucas himself had been recording every episode of Family Guy and was a genuine fan of the show long before the parody discussions began. Fact 105. The title Blue Harvest has a double meaning that most viewers do not catch. It refers both to the Family Guy episode and to an actual piece of Star Wars history. When George Lucas was filming Return of the Jedi in 1982, he was worried about fans and paparazzi invading the outdoor shooting locations in Arizona and California. To prevent this, Lucasfilm created a fake film production called Blue Harvest, which they described as a horror movie with the tagline, "Horror Beyond Imagination." The fake production had its own letterhead, crew shirts, and logos. It was used to hide the actual Star Wars production from public view. By naming the Family Guy parody Blue Harvest, the writers were making a nerdy inside reference that most of their audience never caught. Fact 106. The Blue Harvest episode contains only a single cutaway gag in its entire runtime. This was a deliberate creative decision. The episode was structured as a continuous narrative parody rather than the show's typical format of main plot, interspersed with random tangents. The discipline required to make a whole Family Guy episode with almost no cutaways was itself a kind of achievement, demonstrating that when the production team committed to sustained storytelling, they were genuinely capable of it. Fact 107. The Conway Twitty gag, which features the show cutting away to a full, unedited performance of a Conway Twitty song for an extended period of time with no punchline, appeared multiple times across several seasons. The gag was initially funny to some viewers because of how unexpected it was. Nobody expected a primetime animated comedy to just play a country song. But the joke was repeated enough times to lose whatever element of surprise it had originally possessed. Critics pointed to the Conway Twitty gags as one of the clearest examples of the show filling time, rather than filling it with quality content. Fact 108. Family Guy has predicted real-world events on at least a few occasions that generated significant public attention. In the 2009 episode Extra Large Medium, a joke was made about the Special Olympics that caused considerable controversy. The episode also predicated, eerily, a detail about a real political event of the era. These coincidences are generally the result of probability. A show that makes hundreds of jokes about current events and public figures across dozens of episodes is eventually going to land on something that seems prescient in retrospect. Nevertheless, the moments have been widely circulated online. Number. Section 7. Seth MacFarlane, the man behind the curtain. Seth MacFarlane is the kind of person who makes it difficult to write a simple biography. He is a television creator, a film director, a screen actor, a voice actor, a singer, an advocate for science education and environmental conservation, a political activist, and a devoted fan of science fiction, jazz music, and old Hollywood. He is also someone who nearly died on the morning of the 11th of September, 2001, and who has carried that knowledge with him ever since. Fact 109. On the evening of the 10th of September, 2001, MacFarlane was at his alma mater, RISD, giving a speech to graduating students. After the speech, he went out with some of the faculty for drinks. He stayed out late. He drank more than he should have. The next morning, September 11, he was scheduled to fly from Boston's Logan International Airport to Los Angeles on American Airlines Flight 11. His travel agent had given him an incorrect departure time. The agent wrote down 8:15 a.m. when the actual departure time was 7:45 a.m. MacFarlane arrived at the airport hungover and disoriented. He got to the gate. The gate was already closed. He had missed the flight by approximately 10 minutes. Fact 110. MacFarlane walked into the airport lounge, sat down, and fell asleep. He woke up roughly 45 minutes later to the sound of commotion around him. People were gathered around televisions. The first plane had already hit the North Tower. McFarlane watched the second plane hit and heard the announcement of which flight number it was. He understood immediately that he had been on that plane's passenger list. He told the person sitting next to him what had happened. He then attempted to call his assistant to say he was alive, but his assistant did not receive the message until 20 minutes after the second plane hit, during which time McFarlane's colleagues had believed he was on the flight. Fact 111. McFarlane has spoken publicly about this experience many times, including on The Howard Stern Show and CNN. He has said that one reason the experience has not haunted him the way it might have haunted someone else is that he did not experience a moment of acute fear. He never actually felt himself to be in danger, because he did not realize the danger until it was already past. He learned of the attack after he was safe, not while he was still in jeopardy. He has described his emotional response as strangely muted compared to what people might expect. Fact 112. McFarlane was not the only person who should have been on Flight 11 but was not. Actor Mark Wahlberg was also ticketed for the same flight but had changed his plans the day before. Actress Leanne Littrell had also been booked on the flight and changed her plans. These coincidences, multiple people who should have died and did not, are one of those footnotes of the September 11 attacks that occasionally resurface in the media. Fact 113. McFarlane has described himself as a strong atheist and has been consistently outspoken about his views on religion throughout his career. His atheism has directly influenced the content of Family Guy. The show's treatment of religion, particularly Catholicism, has been a recurring source of controversy. McFarlane has never backed away from the show's religious satire and has defended it consistently as falling within the bounds of fair commentary. Fact 114. In 2012, McFarlane co-produced and narrated a revival of Carl Sagan's landmark science television series Cosmos. The original Cosmos, A Personal Voyage, had aired in 1980 and is one of the most influential science communication programs ever produced. McFarlane's involvement in bringing it back as Cosmos, a space-time odyssey, was driven entirely by his genuine passion for science and science education. The new series aired on Fox and was hosted by astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson. Getting a science education series onto a major broadcast network was a significant achievement, and McFarlane used his industry position to make it happen. Fact 115. McFarlane is an active supporter of environmental conservation. He has donated significant sums to organizations including Rainforest Trust, which works to protect tropical rainforest habitat. In his 2024 interview about the future of Family Guy, he mentioned that the show's financial success continues to fund charitable work, including his donations to Rainforest Trust. He framed the show's continued existence partly in terms of what its profits allow him to do philanthropically. Fact 116. McFarlane hosted the Academy Awards ceremony in 2013. His hosting performance was polarizing. Some critics and industry insiders found his humor inappropriate for the occasion, while others appreciated his energy and musical ability. He performed a song called "We Saw Your Boobs" that listed actresses who had appeared nude in films, which was widely criticized as sexist. McFarlane has reflected on the performance in subsequent interviews with varying degrees of retrospective discomfort. Fact 117. The TED films, the 2012 original and the 2015 sequel, were McFarlane's live-action directorial debut. TED grossed over $549 million worldwide on a budget of approximately $50 million. It starred Mark Wahlberg as a man whose childhood teddy bear came to life and remained alive into adulthood, causing chaos in his adult relationships. The film was rated R and was among the highest-grossing rated comedies of all time at the point of its release. McFarlane played Ted through motion capture and voice performance. Fact 118. A Million Ways to Die in the West. McFarlane's 2014 follow-up to Ted was a Western comedy in which he starred as a sheep farmer in the American West. It performed significantly below expectations both critically and commercially. McFarlane has been relatively candid about the fact that he considered the film an experiment that did not fully succeed. He has said he learned more from that film's failure than from the TED film's success. Fact 119. The Orville, McFarlane's science fiction series that premiered on Fox in 2017 before moving to Hulu, has been described by McFarlane himself as the project he cares about most deeply in his career. He has said it represents his most sincere creative effort, a show made purely out of love for the science fiction tradition it inhabits. The Orville was initially met with skepticism from critics who expected it to be a Star Trek parody, but it has built a devoted following and has received increasingly positive critical assessments over its run. Fact 120. In 2020, McFarlane signed a major development deal with NBC Universal, reportedly worth around $200 million over 5 years. This deal moved his production company, Fuzzy Door Productions, out of the Fox ecosystem and into the broader Comcast NBC Universal family of networks. McFarlane had become publicly uncomfortable with his continued association with Fox as a network, particularly in relation to the political commentary of Fox News. He posted on social media in 2021 that he wished Family Guy was on any other network and described his relationship with Fox as resembling a failing marriage. Fact 121. In April 2025, Disney, which had acquired Fox's entertainment assets, announced a major renewal deal for Family Guy that extended the series through season 27 and the 2028 to 2029 television season. Each season under the new deal would consist of 15 episodes. The deal would take the show to its 30th anniversary. McFarlane's involvement in the announcement was muted compared to earlier renewal announcements, reflecting his somewhat detached relationship with the show's ongoing production. Section 8. Animation Facts Studios, Style Changes, and Secrets in the Frames. Most viewers experience an animated show as a finished product. They see the clean, colorful images on screen and do not think about the enormous industrial process that produced them. Family Guy is animated at multiple studios simultaneously. Its visual style has changed dramatically across different production periods, and within individual frames of the show there are hidden details that most viewers have never noticed. Fact 122. Family Guy is not animated in the United States. The actual drawing and frame-by-frame animation work is done overseas, primarily in South Korea. This is standard practice for American animated television. The production process is divided between the American creative team, which handles writing, voice recording, and creative direction, and overseas animation studios that handle the labor-intensive work of drawing every frame. The Korean studios receive detailed storyboards and direction from the American production team and execute the animation accordingly. Fact 123. The animation style of Family Guy changed noticeably when the show returned from cancellation in 2005. The first 3 seasons were handled partly by Rough Draft Studios, which gave the show a looser, more hand-drawn quality that many fans associate with the show's creative peak. The characters moved with a slight scrappiness that felt alive. When the show returned for season 4, the animation was cleaner and more polished but also stiffer. The characters' movements were more restricted. The thick outlines became more prominent. The overall look was more technically refined, but, to many viewers, less charming. Fact 124. Rough Draft Studios has a notable history in American animation. They have worked on Futurama, Simpsons episodes, and numerous other high-profile animated projects. Their work on the 2nd and 3rd seasons of Family Guy is often cited by animation historians as some of the more expressive and technically interesting animated television work of that era. The studio's approach involved a degree of looseness in the line work that gave characters a sense of physical weight and momentum. Fact 125. The character animation in Family Guy uses what is called limited animation, a style that prioritizes efficient movement over fluid naturalism. Rather than animating every aspect of every character's movement for every frame, limited animation focuses on the most important movements and holds other elements still. This is partly an economic choice. Full animation is extremely expensive, and partly a stylistic choice, as the style has become associated with the show's identity. Fact 126. There is a detail hidden in TV guide listings from the first season of Family Guy that is one of the most beloved Easter eggs in the show's history. In an episode where Peter is looking through a TV guide searching for story ideas for Meg's school newspaper, you can pause the image and read a small line of text beneath Luke Perry's photograph in the guide. The text reads, "If you can read this, Family Guy is on the air." It is a message to attentive viewers, hidden in a background prop that would be impossible to read at normal playback speed. Fact 127. The show has a standard body position that animators use whenever a character dies or is knocked unconscious. The position involves one arm behind the character's body and one arm extended on the ground, creating a specific silhouette. This position has been used so consistently and so frequently across so many episodes that it has become identifiable as a Family Guy visual convention. Fans who began paying attention to this detail started noticing it everywhere. Fact 128. When characters are shown in the background of scenes, they are often placed in repeated positions that the animation team has standardized for efficiency. This is another function of limited animation rather than creating entirely new character poses for every background figure in every scene. The team reuses approved poses and adjusts them as needed. Careful viewers have spotted the same character in the same stance appearing in multiple episodes set in different locations. Fact 129. The giant chicken Peter's recurring rival who appears in extended, over-the-top fight sequences was initially introduced as a one-time joke that the production team found so enjoyable to animate that they kept bringing it back. The chicken fights became one of the show's most distinctive recurring bits. Each fight sequence is longer and more elaborate than the one before it, and they parody the escalating action sequences of action films. The chicken's name, revealed in a later episode, is Ernie. The show confirmed in 2023 that Ernie the giant chicken has died within the show's continuity. Fact 130. The animation of the giant chicken fight sequences requires significantly more production time and effort than the average scene in a Family Guy episode. The fights involve complex physical choreography, multiple character interactions, and elaborate environmental destruction. The production team has noted that these sequences take longer to storyboard, review, and animate than standard dialogue-driven scenes. They are, in production terms, a significant investment for what is essentially an extended gag. Fact 131. The show has used a technique called a cold open, a short scene before the main title sequence, since its early seasons. These cold opens often have no connection to the main plot of the episode and serve as standalone jokes. This structure allows the writers to include material that does not fit neatly into the episode's actual story. Some of the show's most remembered moments come from these standalone cold opens. Fact 132. There is a sequence in the episode Road to the Multiverse where the animation style shifts into a version of the show drawn by the Disney animation team. This sequence required formal coordination between the Family Guy production and Disney's animation department. The Disney animators working on the sequence had to learn to apply Disney's visual language, the color theory, the character proportions, the lighting style to Family Guy characters. The result was a genuine curiosity. Griffin family members rendered in the style of Sleeping Beauty or Snow White. Fact 133. The show's use of widescreen format began with Season 9. Prior to that, the show had been produced in the traditional 4:3 aspect ratio used by older televisions. The transition to widescreen coincided with the broader industry shift toward high-definition television, which required wider images. The final episode of Season 8, the never-aired Partial Terms of Endearment, is the last episode produced in the old 4:3 format, making it a transition point in the show's visual history as well as its content history. Number. Section 9. Cultural Impact, Merchandise, and Family Guy Around the World. Family Guy is not just a television show, it is an economic entity. It generates revenue through broadcast rights, streaming licenses, DVD sales, merchandise, video games, theme park attractions, and licensing agreements. And it has spread into cultures and languages far beyond American English, creating local versions of its humor that sometimes land very differently than they do in the original. Fact 134. Family Guy merchandise generates hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue globally. The product categories include clothing, toys, collectibles, video games, board games, and food products. Peter Griffin's face is one of the most recognizable cartoon character images in the world. The licensing of this image and the other characters generates passive income for Fox and Disney that continues regardless of how the show's actual ratings are performing in any given season. Fact 135. There have been multiple Family Guy video games. The most significant of these is Family Guy: Back to the Multiverse, which was released in 2012. The game allowed players to travel through alternate versions of the show's universe and featured voice work from the main cast. It received mixed reviews but sold well among fans of the show. More recently, Family Guy characters have appeared in the Battle Royale game Fortnite, reflecting the ongoing effort to keep the brand relevant across different entertainment platforms and demographics. Fact 136. Family Guy. The Quest for Stuff is a mobile game released in 2014 that allows players to rebuild the show's fictional city after it has been destroyed by Peter in a fight with the giant chicken. The game uses the free-to-play model and has been downloaded many millions of times. Its continued operation through the 2020s reflects the audience's appetite for interactive engagement with the show's world, even as television viewership has declined. Fact 137. Family Guy has been dubbed into numerous languages for international broadcast. The show airs in the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, Germany, France, Italy, Spain, Brazil, and many other countries. Each market receives a dubbed version in which the voice actors are required not just to translate the dialogue, but to adapt the humor for their local audience, a process called localization that requires significant creative judgment. Jokes that depend on specific American cultural references need to be replaced or explained for audiences that may not share those references. Fact 138. The United Kingdom has a particular relationship with Family Guy. The show has aired on Channel 4, BBC 3, and other British networks across its run. British audiences discovered the show partly through the Adult Swim reruns that American audiences were watching, and partly through the DVD releases. The United Kingdom was also, as noted earlier, the only country where the banned American episode Partial Terms of Endearment aired on BBC 3 in June 2010. Fact 139. Family Guy has had a presence at San Diego Comic-Con for many years. The show's panel appearances at the convention have been used to announce major upcoming story developments, controversial creative decisions, and cast news. The announcement that the banned Season 8 finale would not air in the United States was made at Comic-Con 2009. These panel events generate enormous fan engagement and media coverage, regardless of how the show's current ratings are performing. Fact 140. The show's relationship with the internet fundamentally changed its cultural presence during the mid-2000s. YouTube launched in 2005, the same year. Family Guy returned from cancellation. Almost immediately, fans began uploading individual cutaway gags and memorable sequences from the show. These clips circulated through social media and became viral content that introduced Family Guy to audiences who had never watched it on television. The show was, in this sense, one of the first television programs to have its cultural impact significantly shaped by internet clip culture. Fact 141. Family Guy clips on YouTube continue to accumulate millions of views years after the episodes they come from originally aired. Some individual clips have accumulated well over 50 million views. The most viral clips tend to be self-contained comedy sequences, moments that work without the context of the broader episode. This is a function of the show's cutaway format, which was designed to create these standalone moments, and it has made Family Guy one of the most shared television programs of the internet era. Fact 142. The show has been referenced and parodied by dozens of other television programs, films, and cultural properties. Being parodied is, in a sense, the ultimate indicator of cultural saturation. It means you have become so well known that other creative works can assume their audience will recognize the reference. Family Guy has reached that level of cultural recognition in the English-speaking world and in many markets beyond it. Fact 143. TV Guide ranked Family Guy as the 9th greatest television cartoon of all time in 2013. This ranking placed it above some shows that have received significantly more critical acclaim in the years since, reflecting the degree to which Family Guy had, at that point, penetrated mainstream culture in a way that more artistically ambitious shows had not. Number, Section 10. Records, ratings, rivalries, and the numbers. Numbers tell a story that opinions cannot. The ratings history of Family Guy is one of the most dramatic arcs in television history, a premiere that drew 22 million viewers, a return from cancellation that drew nearly 12 million, and a slow, consistent decline that has resulted in the show now drawing fewer than 1 million viewers per new episode. These numbers do not tell the whole story, but they are an essential part of it. Fact 144. Family Guy is currently one of the longest-running scripted American primetime television series. The only programs ahead of it are The Simpsons, Law and Order, Special Victims Unit, and the original Law and Order. Reaching this level of longevity in primetime television is genuinely extraordinary. The vast majority of shows end before they reach their 5th season. Family Guy has run for more than 25 years and has been formally renewed through its 27th season. Fact 145. Season 20 of Family Guy averaged just 1.31 million viewers, with a 0.45 rating in the 18 to 49 demographic. By season 23, the average had dropped to approximately 723,000 viewers with a 0.19 rating. These numbers represent a decline of more than 90% from the show's peak post-cancellation audience. The show that once drew nearly 12 million viewers on its return now draws fewer than 750,000. Fact 146. Despite these declining numbers, the show continues to be renewed. The economics of animated television explain why. An animated show costs significantly less to produce than a live-action drama or comedy. There are no sets to build, no expensive location shoots, no large on-screen acting casts to pay. The animation is produced overseas. The voice actors record in a booth. The cost-per-viewer ratio is more favorable than for live-action, which means the show can remain economically viable at viewership numbers that would immediately cancel a live-action series. Fact 147. Family Guy generates enormous revenue outside of its broadcast rights. The show airs in syndication on multiple cable networks, including Adult Swim and FXX. It streams on Hulu. The licensing and streaming rights collectively generate far more money than the first-run broadcast on Fox. In modern television economics, the live television audience is just one component of a show's total economic value. Family Guy's enormous library of episodes, more than 400 at this point, makes it a reliable source of streaming content with a well-established audience. Fact 148. In 2019, Fox moved Family Guy from its longtime 9 p.m. Sunday time slot to 9:30 p.m. This was the first sign that the network was reconsidering the show's position in the lineup. Then, for the 2023 to 2024 broadcast season, Fox moved Family Guy and Bob's Burgers entirely off of Sunday nights and placed Family Guy on Wednesday evenings. This was the first time Family Guy had aired on a weekday since 2002, when the original troubled run was in its death spiral. Fact 149. The Emmy nomination for Outstanding Comedy Series in 2009 was a high point that now seems very distant from the show's current position. The fact that Family Guy was the first animated series since The Flintstones in 1961 to receive that nomination, nearly 50 years of animated television had come and gone without any show reaching that distinction, reflected the degree to which Family Guy had earned genuine respect as a comedic achievement. The nomination also came despite the fact that the show had already shown some of the early signs of decline. It was nominated specifically because certain episodes from that season, the Star Wars special, and others demonstrated what the show was capable of at its best. Fact 150. The show has received 32 Primetime Emmy Award nominations in total across its run, winning 9 of them. The majority of the wins have been in the Outstanding Character Voiceover Performance category, primarily for MacFarlane's performances as Stewie and Brian. The show has also won in categories related to music, sound, and animation. Seth MacFarlane holds the record for the most Emmy wins in the Outstanding Character Voice-Over Performance category, tied with voice actors from The Simpsons. Fact 151. Family Guy was canceled during the 2023 WGA strike because MacFarlane and the showrunners refused to work during the work stoppage. MacFarlane was visible on the picket lines and was consistent in his support for the writers. This was the third time in the show's history that a writer's strike had directly affected its production. The first two were the strikes of 2001 and 2007 to 2008. Fact 152. The 2007 to 2008 WGA strike had a significant impact on Season 6 and Season 7 of Family Guy. The strike began in November 2007 and lasted until February 2008. During the strike, Fox aired 3 completed Family Guy episodes without MacFarlane's permission. These episodes had already been finished before the strike began, so Fox had the legal right to broadcast them. But doing so against the creator's wishes left a lasting mark on MacFarlane's relationship with the network. The incident was one of several that contributed to the erosion of trust between MacFarlane and Fox over the years. Section 11. Connections, crossovers, and the broader MacFarlane universe. Family Guy does not exist in isolation. It is part of a larger creative world that MacFarlane has built across several shows, films, and other projects. The connections between these properties, the shared characters, the crossed-over storylines, the recurring themes and sensibilities constitute a kind of extended universe that rewards attentive viewers. Fact 153. American Dad shares a creator with Family Guy but has developed a completely different identity as a show. The core structural difference is that American Dad does not use cutaway gags. This single creative decision, the absence of the cutaway, forced the American Dad writers to develop their storytelling skills in a direction that Family Guy's writers did not follow. The result, as many fans and critics have noted, is a show that tells better stories and has better developed characters than its more famous sibling. Fact 154. American Dad premiered on the 6th of February 2005, just before Family Guy's Season 4 premiere. It aired right after Family Guy and Fox's Sunday night lineup for many years, which gave it a lead-in audience from the more established show. Despite this advantage, American Dad initially struggled to define itself. Critics were lukewarm about its first season, which relied too heavily on political satire driven by the character of Stan Smith's extreme conservatism. Fact 155. Beginning around its third season, American Dad began to evolve dramatically. The character of Roger, the alien who has the ability to adopt completely different personas, effectively becoming entirely different people, became the vehicle for an explosion of creative variation. Roger can appear in any episode as anyone, a different gender, a different age, a different occupation, a different personality. This gave the writers an infinitely renewable source of new material. No matter how long the show runs, Roger's unlimited personas mean there is always a new version of him to explore. Fact 156. American Dad moved from Fox to the TBS cable network after its 11th season in 2014. The move could have been catastrophic. Network shows rarely survive the transition to cable without significant audience loss. Instead, American Dad thrived at TBS, which gave the writers more creative freedom and a different kind of audience relationship. The show continued to produce critically praised seasons well into its run on TBS. Fact 157. The Cleveland Show. The Family Guy spin-off centered on Cleveland Brown ran for 4 seasons from 2009 to 2013. It was created by Seth MacFarlane, Richard Appel, and Mike Henry. The show relocated Cleveland to his hometown of Stuhlbend, Virginia, where he reconnects with and marries a high school sweetheart. The Cleveland Show received mixed reviews throughout its run and never achieved the cultural footprint of its parent series. It was canceled in 2013, with Cleveland subsequently returning to appear on Family Guy proper. Fact 158. The Family Guy and Simpsons crossover episode, titled The Simpsons Guy, aired in Season 13 of Family Guy in 2014. It ran for approximately 45 minutes, making it one of the longest episodes the show has ever produced. The episode involved the Griffin family traveling to Springfield after Peter inadvertently offends an entire region, and the family is forced to flee. In Springfield, they meet and interact with the Simpson family in ways that reflected the parallel structures of the two shows. The episode was the most-watched animated crossover in television history at the time of its airing. Fact 159. The Simpsons Guy featured an extended sequence in which Peter Griffin and Homer Simpson fight each other. The fight was animated in the style of the legendary chicken fights from Family Guy, over the top, escalating violence rendered in the absurdist key that those sequences have always used. The sequence was beloved by fans of both shows and demonstrated that the crossover could be done with genuine affection for both properties. Fact 160. MacFarlane has expressed interest in potentially crossing over Family Guy with the Orville at some point, though this has not been formally developed. The two shows inhabit very different tonal registers. One is a crude animated comedy, and the other is a sincere science fiction drama, which makes an actual crossover logistically complex. But MacFarlane has joked about the possibility in interviews. Fact 161. The Ted universe, which encompasses the 2 Ted films and a live-action prequel series that premiered on Peacock in 2024, is also part of MacFarlane's broader creative output. The Ted streaming series explores how Ted the Bear first became animated when a young John Bennett wished for him to come alive on Christmas Day. The show stars Max Burkholder and is set in the 1990s, giving it a period flavor that distinguishes it from the films. MacFarlane voices Ted in the series, as he did in both films. Fact 162. MacFarlane's singing career is a genuine artistic enterprise, not a celebrity vanity project. He has released multiple albums of big band and jazz standards, working with accomplished musicians and arrangers in the tradition of the great mid-century American pop vocalists. His debut album, Music is Better Than Words, was released in 2011 and received positive reviews. He has performed live concerts showcasing this material. His musical sensibility, a deep love for the 1940s and 1950s, American popular music tradition informs everything he does, including the musical sequences in Family Guy. Fact 163. MacFarlane has been a vocal supporter of NASA and the broader space exploration community. He has appeared at events supporting space science and has used his public platform to advocate for continued investment in scientific research. His science fiction work, both The Orville and his involvement in the Cosmos Revival, reflects a genuine, deep investment in scientific ideas and the importance of humanity's engagement with the cosmos. This side of his public identity is often overlooked by people who know him primarily through Family Guy. Number Section 12. The final facts obscure, strange, and utterly unexpected. We have covered the origins, the characters, the controversies, the ratings, and the people behind the curtain. Now we come to the final stretch, the facts that do not fit neatly into any category, the details that are strange enough to stop you, the connections and coincidences and curiosities that have accumulated over more than 2.5 decades of production. These are the facts that reward the kind of patient, relaxed attention that a late-night deep dive is designed for. Fact 164. The voice of Meg Griffin has been used, in a very roundabout sense, against the actress who provides it. Mila Kunis has spoken in interviews about people approaching her in public and saying the catchphrase associated with Meg's treatment on the show, a dismissive phrase used repeatedly by other characters to silence or belittle her. Real people were saying to the real actress what fictional characters say to her character. The boundary between the show and reality blurred in a way that was, by Kunis's account, deeply uncomfortable. Fact 165. MacFarlane's favorite moment in the entire run of Family Guy is a brief scene from the Season 2 episode, Da Boom. In the episode, which is set after a Y2K apocalypse scenario, the Griffin family is starving and desperately searching for food. In a brief cutaway, Lois mourns how much food they wasted when they never had to worry about hunger. The camera then cuts to a flashback of Peter feeding his television set a full meal, putting a plate of food in front of the screen as if the television were a living creature. MacFarlane has cited this moment specifically as his favorite thing the show has ever done, which is a revealing detail about where his creative sensibility actually lives. Fact 166. The show originally aired in a 4:3 aspect ratio and was produced in standard definition. The transition to widescreen high definition did not begin until Season 9. Watching the early seasons on a modern widescreen television results in black bars on the sides of the image because the show was designed for older television formats. Some streaming platforms have stretched the early episodes to fill a widescreen frame, which slightly distorts the character designs and was not endorsed by the production team. Fact 167. Family Guy has made numerous references to its own history, its own cancellations, and its own ongoing existence as a television show. The show is acutely self-aware about what it is and how it is perceived. Characters have made direct references to the show's falling ratings, the cancellations, the quality debates, and the Fox network's complicated feelings about continuing to air it. This self-awareness is either a form of genuine cleverness or a substitute for the self-improvement it implies, depending on how generously you interpret it. Fact 168. The show's pilot, the original 15-minute pitch film made by MacFarlane for $50,000, was for many years considered lost. It was not included in the Season 1 DVD releases and was not made widely available through official channels. In 2025, reports emerged that the original pitch pilot had been located and that its existence had become known to animation historians and fans. Its rediscovery was treated as a significant event within the community of Family Guy enthusiasts. Fact 169. Jim Keeshan, the production partner who helped MacFarlane animate the original pilot, filed a lawsuit against Fox and MacFarlane on June 1, 1999, just months after Family Guy's premiere. Keeshan claimed he deserved more credit and compensation for his contribution to the pilot. The lawsuit was dismissed on the 28th of December 2000. The details of what Keeshan actually contributed to the pilot versus what MacFarlane created independently have been a subject of some debate in the show's archival history. Fact 170. Seth MacFarlane originally planned to include the character of Death the Grim Reaper in every single episode of Family Guy. The idea was that Death was always present in the background of the Griffin family's life, occasionally making himself known, but mostly just lurking. The concept was abandoned for practical reasons. Weaving a recurring Death character into unrelated storylines proved too complicated. Death appeared in several memorable episodes but never became the constant presence originally envisioned. Fact 171. Family Guy has recycled animation between episodes on several occasions. Background elements, crowd scenes, and minor character movements have been reused when the production timeline required it. This is standard in animated television production, particularly for a show producing 18 to 22 episodes per season, but attentive viewers have occasionally spotted the same background character in the same exact pose, appearing in scenes set in different locations. Fact 172. The writing staff of Family Guy has included people who went on to create shows that were very much not like Family Guy. The experience of working in the Family Guy room taught many writers how to generate jokes at volume, how to break stories efficiently, and how to work within the constraints of animated comedy. These skills transferred to very different creative contexts: drama, sketch comedy, film, and the alumni of the Family Guy writing room constitute a broader influence on American television comedy than is generally acknowledged. Fact 173. The Family Guy production had a long-standing tradition of pranks and surprises in the recording booth. Voice actors would sometimes receive scripts that contained jokes or lines that had been slipped in specifically to get a reaction in the moment of recording. MacFarlane has reportedly done this to fellow cast members, and they have done it to each other. The goal was to capture genuine, surprised laughter from performers who could not anticipate what was coming. Some of these captured reactions found their way into finished episodes. Fact 174. There have been multiple proposals over the years to produce a Family Guy feature film. MacFarlane has discussed the idea in various interviews across the show's run. The challenge has always been finding a story idea compelling enough to justify the expanded runtime and the different distribution model of theatrical release. As of the mid-2020s, no feature film had been greenlit for theatrical release, though the direct-to-DVD Stewie Griffin, The Untold Story from 2005, remains the closest the franchise has come to a movie. Fact 175. The character of Meg Griffin, despite being one of the most mistreated characters in the show's history, has experienced a genuine rehabilitation in the more recent seasons. Beginning around season 14, the frequency and severity of the abuse directed at Meg began to decrease. By seasons 22 and 23, she was being written as a more capable, more resilient, and occasionally genuinely admirable character. Writers who joined the staff in recent years and pushed back against the sustained cruelty toward Meg have been credited with this shift. The improvement in Meg's treatment represents one of the few genuine creative corrections the show has made in response to sustained criticism. Fact 176. A spin-off series focused on Stewie Griffin, tentatively titled Stewie, is reportedly in development as of the mid-2020s, with a planned release window of 2027 to 2028. The premise would reportedly focus on Stewie as a character outside of the Griffin family dynamic, which raises interesting questions about what happens to the character when he no longer has the family unit to define himself against. Whether this series moves forward and what form it ultimately takes will depend on negotiations with the relevant networks and streaming platforms. Fact 177. When Seth MacFarlane was asked in April 2024 about the future of Family Guy, he said he did not see a good reason to stop making it. He cited the fact that the show makes people happy, that it funds charitable causes, and that it had reached what he called escape velocity, a point at which a show has been running so long and has generated so much institutional momentum that there is no obvious moment to stop. He said there was a time when he thought it might be time to end the show, but that moment had passed. He framed the show's continuation in terms of audience demand and financial utility. He did not say he was excited about the new stories he wanted to tell. He did not speak about characters he wanted to develop or directions he wanted to explore. He spoke about a show that continues because it can, that has been going for so long that stopping would itself be the more unusual choice. And maybe that is the most telling fact of all. Not a trivia answer or a behind-the-scenes detail, but a truth about what very long-running things eventually become, not projects pursued out of creative urgency, but institutions that continue because the machinery built to sustain them is more powerful than any one person's doubts about whether they should keep running. Family Guy started as a thesis film made by a 21-year-old in his dorm room with no budget and total creative freedom. It is ending, if it ever ends, as a multi-billion-dollar licensed property owned by one of the largest entertainment conglomerates in the world. The distance between those two things is extraordinary, and every fact between them, every canceled season and improbable comeback, every voice that found its way into a character, every joke that pushed too far, every episode that accidentally predicted the future, every argument in a writing room, and every night Seth MacFarlane stayed up animating in his college apartment adds up to something that is genuinely, irreducibly strange. That is the story of Family Guy, and now you know 177 pieces of it. If you made it this far and you're still awake, honestly, good for you. If you drifted off somewhere around Fact 80 and are just coming back to consciousness right now, that's good too. That's exactly what this was made for. Either way, if you enjoyed this, please hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. It genuinely makes a difference in how these videos get seen and shared. And drop a comment below with where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there. I read every single one. See you in the next one. Number. Going deeper into the facts, elaborations, context, and what they mean. Every one of the 177 facts we just moved through deserves more time than a single paragraph can give it. The facts that are most interesting are not interesting because of what happened, but because of what happened around them, the context, the implications, the things that were going on in the world and in the production building and in Seth MacFarlane's personal life at the moment. Those events occurred. So let us go back. Let us slow down even further. Let us spend time in the places where the really interesting details live. Going deeper. The world of 1999 and what Family Guy was walking into. When Family Guy premiered on the 31st of January 1999, the television landscape was completely different from what exists today. There was no streaming. There was no Netflix. There was no on-demand viewing. If you missed a show when it aired, your options were to wait for a rerun or, if you were particularly dedicated, record it on a VHS tape. The idea that a show's audience could continue to grow for years after the show had already been canceled because people could access it digitally at any time from anywhere simply did not exist as a possibility. This matters because it means the original cancellation of Family Guy after Season 3 was, in the world of 1999 to 2002, genuinely final. When a show got canceled in that era, it was canceled. The audience scattered. The crew moved on. The show faded. The only path back was if a network decided to produce new episodes, which almost never happened. The idea that a dead show could build a new audience through home video distribution and cable reruns while it was technically canceled, the idea that a show could be more popular in death than it had been in life, this was genuinely new. Nobody had done it before. Nobody had even seriously considered that it was possible. When Cartoon Network's Adult Swim began airing Family Guy reruns in April 2003, the people making that decision were taking what felt like a relatively low-risk gamble. They had paid almost nothing for the rights. The show was canceled and forgotten. The worst that could happen was that nobody watched. Instead, the show immediately became the highest-rated program on the block. It beat cable competition. It beat some broadcast competition. Its audience, which had existed quietly, loyally, watching reruns and buying DVDs in the dark, suddenly had a place to gather. Adult Swim gave them that place. The experience of watching Family Guy on Adult Swim in 2003 was different from watching it on Fox in 1999. The late-night cable audience had a different relationship with the material. They were watching alone, or with friends who had chosen to be up at midnight watching cartoons, which meant they had already self-selected as a certain kind of viewer. The show hit differently in that context. Its irreverence felt more appropriate at 11:30 p.m. than it had at 9 p.m. on a Sunday. The dark humor, the willingness to go where other shows would not, the sense that nobody was particularly worried about offending anyone, all of that played better in the context of late-night cable. And then the DVD sales happened simultaneously, and the numbers became impossible to argue with. 3 million copies of the DVD sets in the space of a few months. The best-selling television DVD of 2003, a canceled show, was outselling everything else on the market. Fox was watching all of this happen and trying to do the math. If this many people want to own physical copies of this show, how many of them would come back and watch it if it were on television again? The answer, when it finally came, was 11 million. That is how many people watched the Season 4 premiere. The deeper point here is not just about Family Guy. It is about what the Family Guy experience revealed about the relationship between audiences and the shows they love. It revealed that audiences are more loyal, more patient, and more dedicated than the television industry had assumed. It revealed that a show could have an enormous, passionate audience that Nielsen ratings, which measured who was watching at the moment, something aired completely failed to detect. The tools the industry was using to measure success were not measuring the right things. Family Guy's revival forced a rethinking of what those tools were actually capturing and what they were missing. The lesson the television industry took from Family Guy's comeback became enormously consequential when streaming emerged a decade later. The logic of there are audiences for shows that do not fit conventional success metrics, which Family Guy proved with DVDs and cable reruns, became the entire operating premise of Netflix and every streaming service that followed it. When Netflix began reviving canceled shows like Arrested Development and Gilmore Girls, they were following a trail that Family Guy had blazed. The business model of betting on loyal niche audiences rather than mass general audiences begins, in a meaningful sense, with the Family Guy DVD sales of 2003. Going deeper, the writing room and what made early Family Guy work. There is a particular quality to the comedy of the first 3 seasons of Family Guy that is difficult to fully describe, but very easy to feel when you watch those episodes. It is a quality of confidence. The jokes are not tentative. The writing is not hedging. When the show goes somewhere dark or strange or offensive, it goes there completely, and then it does something with where it went. There is a punchline waiting on the other side. The darkness is not just darkness for its own sake. This quality, the confidence of the writing, the certainty of the comedic voice, is the product of a specific set of people in a specific room at a specific moment in their careers. Seth MacFarlane in 1999 was 25 years old and had just been handed his own television show by a major broadcast network. He had come straight from working on children's cartoons. He was bursting with things he wanted to say, characters he wanted to explore, jokes he had been storing up. He had not yet been worn down by the friction of producing a show season after season. He had not yet been frustrated by network interference or creative disputes or contractual complications. He was completely fresh. The writers he assembled around him were similarly positioned. Chris Sheridan, Danny Smith, Gary Janetti, Ricky Blitt, Neil Goldman, Garrett Donovan, Matt Weitzman, Mike Barker. These were people at the beginning of their professional television careers, bringing with them everything they had been thinking about comedy for years before anyone hired them to be funny on television. They had something to prove. They were not protecting established success, they were building new success from nothing. That hunger produces a particular quality of creative output. It is focused and specific in ways that later work, when people have more to lose, sometimes is not. The structure of a Season 1 Family Guy episode is worth examining in some detail. A typical episode had a clear 3-act structure. There was a setup, some situation the Griffin family was getting into. There was escalation, the situation becoming more complicated. There was resolution, Peter learning something, or the episode finding an ending that felt at least somewhat earned. The cutaway gags were woven into this structure as supplementary material. They commented on what was happening in the main story. They extended a joke that the main story had set up. They provided variety so that the episode did not feel monotonous, but they existed alongside the story, not instead of it. An episode like Death Has a Shadow, the pilot follows this structure. Peter loses his job, tries to hide it from Lois by collecting welfare checks, gets caught, faces consequences. Within that story, there are cutaway gags that riff on adjacent ideas. Other times Peter has done something stupid. Other contexts for his particular brand of blundering. The cutaways feel like extensions of the central character, not interruptions of the central story. You could remove most of the cutaways and still have a coherent, if shorter, episode. The story would survive. Compare that to a typical later season episode, where the story exists primarily as scaffolding for the cutaways. In many episodes from season 10 onward, if you remove the cutaways, you would be left with perhaps 8 minutes of material. The remaining 14 minutes are gags that have no necessary connection to what the characters are experiencing. The structure has been inverted. The episodes are not stories that contain jokes. They are collections of jokes that are loosely organized around a story. This structural shift is one of the most significant creative changes in the show's history, and it happened gradually enough that fans barely noticed it in real time. Season by season, the ratio shifted. A few more cutaways per episode. A slightly thinner main plot. The changes accumulated until they were enormous, but no single episode was the moment everything changed. It crept up on the show and on the audience. Going deeper. What the Meg Griffin situation actually says. The treatment of Meg Griffin across the middle period of Family Guy's run, roughly seasons 4 through 14, is the subject that makes even longtime fans of the show most uncomfortable when they reflect on it directly. It is easy when you are watching an episode as it airs to process the jokes about Meg as part of the show's general irreverence. It is harder when you sit down and think about what the show is actually doing over the course of a decade to maintain that comfort. What the show did to Meg over those seasons was not a joke that went too far. It was a sustained, consistent, creative decision, renewed episode after episode, season after season, to make one character's existence the punchline of an extended joke about worthlessness. The joke was not that Meg did embarrassing things, or made bad decisions, or had comic flaws. The joke was that Meg existing was itself a problem, that her presence in a room was worse than her absence, that the appropriate response to her was contempt, that she deserved what she got, not because of anything she did, but simply because of who she was. This is a meaningfully different kind of humor than the show's other recurring dynamics. When Peter does something stupid, the show acknowledges that what he did was stupid and usually provides some consequence, however mild. When Quagmire's promiscuity gets him into trouble, there is at least the comedic acknowledgement that his behavior has produced a result. But Meg's suffering in the most brutal of the middle season episodes is presented without any framework that might contextually justify it. It just happens. The other characters are just cruel, and the episode moves on. The writers themselves have offered explanations for this. The most notable and the most uncomfortable is MacFarlane's own statement that the Meg abuse was a bunch of male writers not knowing how to write for a teenage girl. This is an explanation, but it is not an excuse, and it is not entirely satisfying, because knowing you do not know how to write something does not typically lead to writing something cruel. Choosing to write cruelty when you cannot write depth is a specific creative decision, not an absence of one. What the Meg situation reveals is a broader truth about what happens to characters in long-running shows when the writing room loses interest in them. A character who the writers cannot find interesting becomes a character who is used as a prop for other characters' stories. And the easiest prop to reach for in a comedy, particularly an adult animated comedy that has already established itself as willing to be cruel, is the target. Someone to be the butt of the joke. Someone whose presence prompts the other characters to demonstrate their own personalities by rejecting or mocking that presence. Meg became the show's built-in sacrifice, and the fact that she is a teenage girl who just wants to be loved made the sacrifice uglier than it might have been with a different character. The rehabilitation of Meg in seasons 15 through 23 is real, but it is incomplete in a specific way. The show cannot undo what it spent 10 seasons establishing. Viewers who watched Meg be abused for years carry that accumulation into every episode that treats her better. The newer, stronger Meg is surrounded by the ghost of everything that was done to the character before. She can be written as competent and resilient all she wants. The history does not go away. Going deeper. The night MacFarlane almost died. It is worth spending more time with the September 11 near miss than a single fact can accommodate, because the story illuminates something important about MacFarlane's psychological relationship to the show he created. He was at his alma mater the night before at the Rhode Island School of Design, the place where he had made the thesis film that started everything, the place where he had spent 4 years developing the sensibility that became Family Guy. He was there giving a speech to graduating students. He was the success story, the man who had taken what he learned in those classrooms and turned it into a television show that had aired on a major network and had come back from cancellation and was on the verge of becoming something even larger. He went out with faculty afterward. He had drinks, he stayed late, he was celebrating. The next morning he was supposed to fly home to Los Angeles. He had been booked on the early flight. His travel agent had the departure time wrong by 30 minutes. He was hungover. He arrived at the gate after it had already closed. He went to the airport lounge. He fell asleep on a chair. He woke up to an airport full of people who had just watched the world change. He sat in a lounge chair and watched the second plane hit on a television screen, and he understood that he had been on the passenger list of the first plane. His assistant, when he finally got the message that MacFarlane had missed the flight and was safe, did not receive it until 20 minutes after the second impact. During that window, The people who worked with McFarlane believed he was dead. McFarlane has said that because he did not experience the panic of knowing he was in danger, because he learned of the attack after he was already safe, the experience did not traumatize him in the way it might have traumatized someone who had been closer to the crisis in real time. He has described his emotional response as strangely calm. He has said he understood intellectually that he had come very close to dying, but could not fully feel the weight of it the way you might expect. What he did do, in the years that followed, was make references to September 11 in his work. The show made jokes that touched on the attacks, sometimes in ways that were sharp and funny, and sometimes in ways that were uncomfortable. The 2010 episode Back to the Pilot, in which Brian and Stewie travel back in time and Brian attempts to prevent the attacks, is the most direct engagement. The episode's conclusion that preventing September 11 leads to worse outcomes, and that Stewie and Brian must therefore allow the attacks to happen again, is a remarkable piece of writing, morally complex in a way that Family Guy did not often attempt. McFarlane's personal proximity to the attacks makes the episode's willingness to engage with the question of what would happen if they had been prevented especially interesting. The broader point is that McFarlane's near miss on September 11 is part of the context of everything he has made since. He is a man who knows, with absolute specificity, that a different choice about which flight to take would have ended his life at 27. He has been making Family Guy and The Orville and Cosmos and all the rest from that knowledge. Whether that knowledge has made him more deliberate or more careless about what he makes and how long he makes it is a question that only he can fully answer. Going deeper, the strange position Family Guy now occupies. By 2025, Family Guy was in a position that had no clear precedent in the history of American television. It was airing on Wednesday nights, not Sunday, not its natural home, not the anchor position in the animation domination block it had occupied for years. Its viewership was a fraction of what it had been at its peak. Its creator had publicly expressed a desire to be on any other network than the one it aired on. It had been renewed through season 27 in a deal that emphasized financial terms rather than creative ambition. And yet it continued. New episodes were being made. The voice cast was still in the booth. The writing room was still staffed. The animation studios overseas were still producing frames. The institutional machinery of the show was still running, as reliably and efficiently as it had been running for 25 years. This is not a unique situation in television history, but it is a rare one. The Simpsons occupied this territory before Family Guy did a show that had long outlived its creative peak and continued to exist primarily as a beloved institution rather than a current creative force. What makes Family Guy's version of this situation slightly different is the visibility of its creator's ambivalence. Matt Groening, the creator of The Simpsons, has never publicly said he wishes The Simpsons was over. McFarlane said exactly that in 2011, when the show still had well over a decade of runtime ahead of it. The question of whether a long-running show has an obligation to end, whether there is a point at which continuing to produce a lesser version of something is an insult to the better version that came before, is one that the television industry has never fully answered. Family Guy's situation makes the question vivid. The show that exists now is not the show that first aired after Super Bowl 33 in January 1999. The characters have changed. The humor has changed. The creator's investment in it has changed. The audience has changed. In some ways, the show is a completely different entity wearing the same clothes as the original. But the original is also still there. The first 3 seasons are still available. The early episodes are still exactly as funny as they ever were. The characters who lived in those episodes are still fully themselves. Nothing about the later seasons can retroactively change what the early seasons were. And that is the most hopeful thing about the situation. The best version of Family Guy is preserved perfectly, exactly as it was, available to anyone who wants to go back and watch it. The 177 facts we have spent time with tonight are mostly facts about the distance between that first version and everything that came after. The distance is enormous, and the journey to it was made one decision at a time. But the starting point, that thesis film, that $50,000 pilot, that Super Bowl premiere, that first season of a young man with something to say who had just been given the most improbable platform imaginable, that starting point was genuinely brilliant, and nothing that came after can fully erase the fact that it happened. A few final facts that deserve their own space. The show's ending theme, the brief piece of music that plays over the credits at the end of each episode, is not a standard piece of music that was composed specifically for the show. It is an arrangement of an existing piece that was adapted for the show's purposes. The decision to use this piece reflects the general musical sensibility of the production, a love of mid-century American popular music, and an ear for the warmth and nostalgia that certain musical styles can evoke. The show's production offices have been located on the Fox lot in Century City, California, for most of its run. The physical space where Family Guy has been written, recorded, and produced is a working part of one of Hollywood's most storied entertainment complexes. Writers working on Family Guy have occasionally interacted with writers and producers from other Fox productions in the building's common areas, creating those brief moments of cross-pollination between worlds that do not normally overlap. MacFarlane's voice, his actual speaking voice, not any of the character voices he performs, is warm, measured, and clearly trained. He speaks in complete sentences. He pauses thoughtfully between ideas. He projects the quality of someone who has spent decades not just performing voices but genuinely thinking about language and how to use it. In interviews, he often gives much more interesting and considered answers than the interviewer expects, which is perhaps the inevitable result of a man who has spent 25 years writing jokes for a living. The show has never been afraid of its own history. It has made episodes specifically about its past, about its cancellations, about the Adult Swim years, about its own stylistic evolution. It is genuinely self-aware in ways that not many long-running shows can claim. Whether that self-awareness has ever translated into genuine self-improvement is a much harder question. Knowing your flaws and fixing them are very different things. Family Guy has always been better at the former. And finally, the fact that might be the most important of all, the one that underlies everything else. Family Guy changed what was possible for adult animated television. Before Family Guy proved that there was a massive, passionate audience for crude, sophisticated, boundary-pushing animated comedy for adults on primetime network television, the landscape for that kind of show was narrower. The Simpsons existed, Beavis and Butthead existed, South Park existed on cable, but the idea that a full-fledged animated comedy with a regular weekly family sitcom format could be as dark and as experimental and as willing to offend as Family Guy was, that idea needed Family Guy to prove it was commercially viable. Every adult animated show that has launched in the past 25 years owes something to Family Guy. Not because Family Guy invented the genre, but because Family Guy demonstrated that the genre could sustain a long-running broadcast network series with a huge audience. It lowered the threshold for what networks would attempt. It broadened the definition of what belonged on Sunday night television. It made the world slightly more permissive about what animation could be for and who it could speak to. That is a legacy that survives all the declining ratings, all the creative missteps, all the character flanderizations and cutaway overloads and shock value escalations. The show's influence on the medium is baked into the foundation of 25 years of television that came after it. Every show you love that is dark, funny, animated, and meant for adults, it is living in a world that Family Guy helped make possible. That is worth knowing. That is worth sitting with. That is worth staying awake for or drifting off to, as the case may be. Good night, and thank you for watching. Number Extended Deep Dive. The characters in full: every Griffin, every friend, every corner of Spooner Street. The Griffin family lives on Spooner Street, and Spooner Street is more than just an address. It is a community. Over the course of 25 seasons, the neighbors and supporting characters who populate that street and the broader fictional Rhode Island city around it have become as recognizable and as beloved, in some cases more so than the main cast themselves. Let us spend time with all of them. Peter Griffin. The architecture of a character. Peter Griffin was not designed to be likable in the conventional sense. He was designed to be understandable. There is a difference between those two things that matters enormously to how comedy works. A likable character is someone you want to be around. An understandable character is someone you recognize from your neighborhood, from your family, from your own worst impulses. The humor generated by an understandable character is specifically the humor of recognition, which is different from the humor of admiration. In the first 3 seasons, Peter was funny because he was recognizable. He was the working-class American dad who watched too much TV, drank too much beer, made decisions without thinking them through, and somehow loved his family in a way that was genuine even when it was expressed clumsily. He was not Homer Simpson. Homer has a kind of cosmic innocence that Peter does not quite share. Peter is earthier, more specifically rooted in a particular American social class. He is a guy who works in a brewery and hangs out at a bar called the Drunken Clam and calls his friends Joe and Quagmire in Cleveland. He is a guy from a place. The specific place MacFarlane had in mind for Peter was Rhode Island. The real Rhode Island, the one MacFarlane had lived in for 4 years as a student, is a small, insular state with a very particular culture. It is the smallest state in the Union. It has a complicated relationship with its own regional identity. It is New England, but not Massachusetts. It is industrial, but not quite blue-collar in the Pittsburgh sense. Peter Griffin is a Rhode Island guy in a specific way that rewards attention. His accent, his references, his friends, his bar, his job, all of it is calibrated to a specific geographic and cultural place. As the show progressed and the writing staff changed and MacFarlane himself became more removed from the daily creative work, Peter's connection to that specific place gradually weakened. He became less a Rhode Island guy and more a generic cartoon dad who happened to live somewhere that was labeled Rhode Island. The specificity eroded. The result was a character who was larger and louder but less anchored, funnier in individual moments but less coherent as a human being. The Flanderization of Peter Griffin is documented in the transcript we have been working from, but it is worth adding a detail about the particular mechanics of how it happened. Flanderization in long-running shows typically occurs because writers discover that an extreme version of a character's defining trait is reliably funny in the short term. If Peter being somewhat dumb is funny, then Peter being very dumb is funnier. If Peter being thoughtless is funny, then Peter being actively cruel might be even funnier. The problem is that each escalation makes the next escalation necessary because once the audience has seen Peter at level 7, level 6 no longer feels extreme. You have to go to level 8, and then to 9. And eventually you have gone so far that the character you started with is not visible in the character you are now writing. The writers of Family Guy understood this process intellectually. They even made jokes about it, including jokes about the show itself declining in quality. But understanding a process and being able to resist it are different things, particularly when you are producing 22 episodes a season and the extreme version of the character is reliably getting laughs in the room. Brian Griffin, the character who went wrong in the most interesting way. Of all the character arcs in Family Guy's history, Brian's is the one that most rewards close examination. Not because it was well executed, it was not, but because of what it reveals about the specific mechanisms by which a television show can lose its way. Brian was the character the audience was supposed to identify with. He was the one who reacted to the Griffin family's chaos the way a reasonable person would react. He was smarter than everyone around him. He had opinions. He had taste. He had the kind of self-awareness that Peter conspicuously lacks. The relationship between Brian and Peter in the early seasons was the relationship between the audience's representative and the source of the show's comedic energy. Brian was supposed to be us, watching Peter. When that relationship broke down, when Brian became as problematic as the characters he was originally positioned to critique, something fundamental shifted in the show's dynamic. The audience's representative was gone. There was no one left in the main cast who occupied the grounded perspective. Everyone was now inside the chaos, and the audience had no surrogate remaining on the outside of it. This made it much harder to find entry points into the comedy. You need someone to be sane in a story full of insanity. Otherwise, the insanity becomes the baseline, and the show loses its sense of proportion. The Brian of Season 9 episode Brian Writes a Bestseller is worth examining in some detail as the moment the character broke completely. The premise is elegant and potentially very funny. Brian, a failed writer who has been struggling with his novel for years, is encouraged by Stewie to try something different. He writes a self-help book instead. The book becomes a massive bestseller. And then Brian becomes insufferable. The comic potential here is real. A character who has always positioned himself as an intellectual and a serious artist, suddenly being celebrated not for his serious art, but for a cynical commercial product. He threw together quickly that could be genuinely biting. Satire. The joke could be about the gap between artistic pretension and commercial success. It could be about how the market rewards the wrong things. It could illuminate Brian's character by showing him unable to resist the validation, even when it comes from a source he would otherwise despise. Instead, the episode uses Brian's success as an excuse to make him maximally unpleasant. He is not conflicted about the success. He is not privately ashamed of the book's lack of artistic merit. He just becomes arrogant. He treats Stewie, who encouraged him, who believed in him when he had given up on himself, with contempt and cruelty. There is no internal logic to his behavior. The episode is not about Brian's contradictions. It is just about Brian being awful. What makes this so frustrating is that the writers clearly had the technical capacity to write the more interesting version of this story. They know how to construct satire. They did it in the early seasons constantly. The choice to simply make Brian mean rather than contradicted or compromised was a choice, not a failure of ability but a failure of ambition. Or perhaps, more charitably, a failure of time. Writers producing 22 episodes a season do not always have the room to let a premise reach its most complex version. Sometimes you take the version that is ready by the production deadline. Stewie Griffin, what was lost and what was gained? The transition of Stewie Griffin from evil baby to emotionally complex companion figure is the show's most debated creative decision. And it is the one that most clearly divides the audience between people who think the show was right to evolve the character and people who think the show abandoned something irreplaceable in doing so. The case for evolution is this. An evil baby who wants to kill his mother and conquer the world is a very specific joke. It is a brilliant joke. But it is one joke, and even the most brilliant single joke eventually reaches its limits. The writers could add new devices for Stewie to build, new schemes for him to pursue, new targets for his villainy beyond just Lois, and they did, across the first 3 seasons, and the results were frequently extraordinary. But the underlying concept, tiny baby, cartoonishly evil, oblivious family, was always going to have a ceiling on how many directions it could go. The case against evolution is this. The ceiling on the evil baby concept was not as low as the writers seem to think. The show produced before abandoning the evil baby approached roughly 3 seasons of content built on that concept. It then produced more than 15 seasons built on the replacement concept of Stewie as a vulnerable, emotionally complex, identity-questioning character. If the writers could sustain 15 seasons of the softer Stewie, the suggestion that they had exhausted the evil baby concept in 3 seasons does not hold up to scrutiny. The concept was not exhausted. It was abandoned because the writers wanted to try something different. What was lost with the evil baby concept was specifically the element of menace. Early Stewie was genuinely a little frightening. He had the ability to cause real harm and, within the show's logic, the intention to do so. This created a quality of excitement in his scenes that the softer version cannot replicate. Every time early Stewie appeared on screen, there was a charge you did not know what he was going to say or do, and the range of possibilities included things that would genuinely hurt other characters. That unpredictability is the rarest quality in a long-running comedic character, and once it is gone, it cannot be manufactured. What was gained was the relationship between Stewie and Brian, which became the emotional core of the show's best post-revival episodes. The road to episodes work because they put 2 characters together who genuinely enjoy each other and whose different personalities create interesting friction. Stewie's ferocious intelligence and Brian's weary pragmatism are a genuinely effective comic pairing. Stewie challenges Brian. Brian grounds Stewie. The dynamic has produced some of the show's finest 22 minutes, including the extraordinary Brian and Stewie episode that contains no cutaway gags and deals with depression and friendship with more honesty than most live-action dramas would attempt. So the answer, as with most complex creative questions, is that both sides are right. Something genuinely irreplaceable was abandoned. Something genuinely valuable was built to take its place. The net result is a matter of what you value more, the specific brilliant wildness of the original concept or the emotional range that the softer concept enabled. Reasonable people have landed on both sides of this for 20 years, and they will probably continue to disagree for as long as the show exists. Number extended section. The production world. How an episode actually gets made. Most viewers experience a television episode as a finished thing, 22 minutes of sound and image that arrives complete on a screen. They do not think about the 18 months of work that preceded those 22 minutes. They do not think about the rooms full of people arguing about whether a joke is funny, the recording sessions that start and stop and restart, the animation notes that go back to Korea with dozens of specific corrections, the music sessions, the sound editing, the color correction, the final review where someone has to decide whether the episode is ready to air. For Family Guy, the process of making an episode begins in the writing room, typically about a year and a half before the episode will air. Writers pitch story ideas. The best ideas are selected for development. A writer or team of writers is assigned to break the story to work out the structure, the act breaks, the character beats, and the approximate location of the major jokes. This story break is presented to the full room and refined through group discussion. Once the story is broken, a script is written. The script goes through multiple drafts. Each draft is reviewed by the writing staff and by the showrunners. Jokes are cut and replaced. Story logic is tightened. The voice of each character is assessed for consistency. Is this something Peter would actually say? Is this too clever for Peter? Is Brian's behavior consistent with what we established 3 episodes ago? These questions are harder than they sound for a show that has been running for 25 seasons and has an enormous amount of established continuity to maintain. After the script is finalized, the cast records the dialogue. Recording sessions for an animated show are typically more relaxed than live action. Filming the actors are in a booth with microphones, not on a set with cameras. They can do multiple takes without the pressure of maintaining physical blocking or hitting their marks. They can experiment with readings. The director of the episode typically sits outside the booth and provides notes between takes. MacFarlane, when he is present for recording sessions, often performs all 4 of his characters in sequence during the same session. After recording, the audio is sent to the animation studios with detailed storyboards showing what the episode should look like, shot by shot. The storyboards are precise. They include character positions, camera angles, expression notes, and action descriptions. The overseas animation team executes the animation based on these storyboards, then sends the animated footage back to the American production team for review. The review process involves detailed notes on everything that does not look right, character designs that are slightly off-model, movements that do not read clearly, expressions that do not match the audio. The corrected animation comes back, more notes, more corrections. Eventually, the animation is approved, and the episode moves into post-production, where music is added, sound effects are mixed, and the final product is assembled. The whole process, from initial pitch to finished episode, takes approximately 18 months. The writing room is always working on multiple episodes simultaneously. While one episode is in animation, another is being recorded, another is being revised at script stage, and another is still being broken in the room. The production pipeline of a 22-episode season involves hundreds of people working across multiple time zones and multiple production stages simultaneously. This industrial reality is worth keeping in mind when evaluating any creative decision the show makes. Every episode is the product not of a single inspired creative vision, but of an industrial process that involves compromises, time pressures, practical constraints, and the accumulated decisions of dozens of people. When a joke does not land, it is not necessarily because no one noticed it was bad. It might be because there was no time to replace it with something better, or because the alternative that was proposed was even worse, or because someone in the review chain approved it on a bad day. This does not excuse poor creative decisions, but it contextualizes them. Family Guy at its worst is not the result of no one caring. It is the result of an industrial process that makes caring very difficult to maintain consistently across hundreds of episodes and decades of production. Number. The complete record. Every major milestone in Family Guy's broadcast history. The chronological record of Family Guy's broadcast history is a story of extraordinary highs and gradual declines, punctuated by events that redirected the show's trajectory each time it seemed to be approaching a final destination. The 31st of January 1999. The pilot episode, Death Has a Shadow, airs on Fox following Super Bowl 33. 22 million viewers watch. The show has the most prominent television debut possible and makes an immediate cultural impression. The 11th of April, 1999. The remainder of Season 1 begins airing in the show's regular Sunday night time slot, positioned between The Simpsons and The X-Files. The season averages 12.8 million households and finishes 33rd in the Nielsen ratings. Strong numbers for a first season, but not strong enough to erase Fox's anxieties about the show. 2000. Fox moves Family Guy to Thursday nights, where it goes up against Frasier on NBC. The ratings drop significantly. Fox then moves the show to Tuesday nights, where it faces Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, which is in the middle of its ratings peak. Family Guy cannot compete. The first cancellation comes after Season 2, though it is reversed before long. 2001. Season 3 premieres in July in a Thursday night slot at 8 p.m., opposite Friends and Survivor. This is an extraordinarily brutal competitive environment. Friends was one of the most watched shows in the history of television. Family Guy's ratings continue to fall. After Season 3 ends in 2002, Fox cancels the show again. This time the cancellation sticks. 2002 to 2003. Family Guy enters a quiet period. The writing staff scatters. Production stops. The show exists only as reruns on Fox affiliates in some markets. Fox fails to find buyers for the syndication rights. The 20th of April 2003. Adult Swim begins airing Family Guy reruns. Within weeks, the show becomes the highest-rated program on the entire network. The combination of Adult Swim ratings and DVD sales begins building the case for revival. 2003. The Season 1 and 2 DVD sets sell 2.2 million copies in the same week they launch alongside the Adult Swim premiere. They become the best-selling television DVD of 2003. 2004. Fox orders new episodes of Family Guy. Production on Season 4 begins. The show that had been dead for 2 years is suddenly the most anticipated revival in television history. The 1st of May 2005. Season 4 premieres to approximately 11.85 million viewers. Family Guy's return to television is the most successful revival in TV history to that point. The 6th of February 2005. American Dad premieres on Fox, giving MacFarlane 2 shows in the animation domination lineup simultaneously. The 23rd of September 2007. The Blue Harvest Star Wars special airs as the Season 6 premiere. It is the most ambitious and technically impressive thing the show has yet attempted, and generates enormous viewer response. November 2007. The Writers Guild of America strike begins. Production on Family Guy halts. Fox airs 3 completed episodes without MacFarlane's permission. The strike ends on the 12th of February 2008. 2009. Family Guy receives an Emmy nomination for Outstanding Comedy Series, the first time an animated show has received that nomination since The Flintstones in 1961. The show loses to 30 Rock. The 24th of November, 2013. The episode Life of Brian airs. Brian Griffin is killed by a car. National news headlines follow. Social media trends for days. The 15th of December, 2013. Christmas Guy airs. Stewie uses time travel to save Brian. Brian is alive again. The internet declares the death a ratings stunt. The overwhelming consensus of the fan community is correct. 2014. American Dad moves from Fox to TBS. Family Guy loses its Sunday night companion. The 5th of October, 2014. The Simpsons Guy airs, featuring the Griffin and Simpson families together. It is the most watched animated crossover in television history. 2019. Fox moves Family Guy from its longtime 9 p.m. Sunday slot to 9:30 p.m., an early signal of declining network confidence. 2020. Seth MacFarlane signs a $200 million deal with NBC Universal, formally establishing his creative future outside the Fox ecosystem. 2021. MacFarlane posts publicly that he wishes Family Guy was on any network other than Fox. 2023. The WGA strike begins. Family Guy production halts for the 3rd time in its history due to a writer's strike. MacFarlane is on the picket line. The strike ends and production resumes. 2023 to 2024. Fox moves Family Guy from Sunday nights to Wednesday nights. This is the first time the show has aired on a weekday since 2002. April 2024. MacFarlane describes Family Guy as having reached escape velocity in an interview, saying he sees no good reason to stop making it. April 2025. A major renewal deal is announced with Disney, extending Family Guy through season 27 and the 2028 to 2029 television season. The show will reach its 30th anniversary on the air. Each season of the new deal will consist of 15 episodes, 2027 to 2028. A Stewie Griffin spin-off series is reported to be in development for an anticipated release in this window. Whether it will explore the original evil genius character or the softer contemporary version remains to be seen. This is the complete chronological record. 25 years of cancellations and revivals, scheduling disasters and scheduling gifts, creative peaks and gradual declines. A creator who has moved emotionally away from his creation while remaining legally bound to it. An audience that has shrunk but has never fully disappeared. All of it constitutes one of the strangest, richest, and most instructive stories in the history of American television. Number, on the experience of watching Family Guy at night. There is something specific about watching a show like this in the late hours. The house is quiet, everyone else is asleep, or you are the only one awake, and the blue light of the screen is the only light in the room. You are not watching the way you watch during the day, with half your attention on something else, your phone in your hand, processing the show as background texture to whatever else you are doing. You are actually watching, or you are drifting, moving between wakefulness and the early stages of sleep, catching fragments of the show between longer and longer pauses of awareness. This is actually a perfect way to watch a show about a family. Families are most fully themselves in the late hours. The performances of the day have come down. The energy that everyone spends projecting who they want to be has worn out, and what is left is just people. The late-night kitchen is more honest than the afternoon. The quiet house tells more truth than the busy one. The Griffin family at their best is about what families are honestly like: messy, occasionally cruel, frequently absurd, and underneath all of it stubbornly attached to each other. The early seasons understood this. The later seasons mostly forgot it, but the memory of it is still there, in the early episodes, waiting for anyone who wants to go back. The 177 facts we have worked through tonight are not just trivia. They are a map of how something gets built, and then how it changes as the people who built it change, and as the world around it changes, and as the relationship between the audience and the thing they love changes over time. Every long-running show tells this story. Family Guy tells it in a more visible, more documented, more openly acknowledged way than most. That visibility is, in the end, one of the things that makes Family Guy worth studying. The show is not shy about what it is. It never has been. Whether what it is at any given moment is good television is always debatable. But the story of what it is and how it got there, that story is genuinely fascinating, and it is available to anyone who wants to spend time with it. Which is exactly what we have been doing tonight. Number. The long view. Family Guy in the context of American animation history. To fully understand what Family Guy represents not just as a show, but as a moment in cultural history, you have to understand the landscape it walked into when it premiered in January of 1999. Adult animation in the United States had a complicated history up to that point. The medium had been treated, for most of its existence, as a category for children's entertainment. Cartoons were for Saturday morning. They were for after school. They were not for primetime network television, and they were certainly not for the kinds of stories and humor that Family Guy would eventually bring to the format. The great exception to this was The Simpsons, which had been running since 1989 and had demonstrated definitively that animated television could attract large adult audiences with sharp, sophisticated humor. The Simpsons was a cultural landmark. It had been on the cover of Time magazine, it had changed the way animated shows were produced and sold, and it had created the space on Fox's Sunday night lineup that would eventually accommodate Family Guy. But The Simpsons, for all its brilliance, had certain self-imposed limits. It was a show that cared deeply about its characters. It maintained a fundamental warmth, a sense that the Simpsons family, despite Homer's failures and Bart's mischief and the general dysfunction of Springfield, were people worth caring about. The show had satirical teeth, but it never lost its fundamental affection for the world it was depicting. Family Guy arrived as something different. Its affection was present early. Family Guy genuinely loved the Griffins, but its willingness to push beyond the limits that The Simpsons had observed was much more aggressive. It was more willing to be offensive for the sake of being offensive, more willing to make jokes that had no redemptive frame, more willing to treat its characters cruelly in service of a laugh. Whether this represented creative courage or creative irresponsibility has been debated for 25 years. The honest answer is probably that it was sometimes one and sometimes the other, often within the same episode. South Park had, since 1997, been doing something similar on cable, pushing adult animation into territory that would have been unthinkable on network television. But South Park's distribution on Comedy Central meant it was operating in a different regulatory environment and reaching a different kind of audience. Family Guy was attempting to bring that level of boundary pushing to network television, which was subject to FCC oversight and broadcast standards. The fact that it succeeded, that it maintained its place on Fox for 25 years despite generating consistent controversy, is a testament to either the show's skill at managing its provocations or Fox's tolerance for controversy as long as the ratings justified it, or some combination of both. The Parents Television Council, which is a conservative media watchdog organization that rates television content for family appropriateness, put Family Guy on its worst shows list in 2000, 2005, and 2006. The FCC received multiple formal complaints about the show's content and petitions asking that it be blocked from broadcast. None of these efforts resulted in the show being taken off the air. The FCC investigated some specific complaints and found either that the content did not meet the legal threshold for actionable indecency or that the regulatory framework did not provide grounds for the action requested. The fact that Family Guy survived all of this, survived the cancellations, the regulatory pressure, the cultural criticism, the declining ratings, the creator's own ambivalence, and continued to produce new episodes into its late 20s as a television series is extraordinary. It speaks to the institutional durability of a show that has become part of the machinery of a major broadcast network. Fox has a Sunday night lineup, and for 25 years the Sunday night lineup has included Family Guy. That habit is very hard to break, even when the reasons that originally created the habit have faded. The secondary characters, a complete accounting. The world of Family Guy extends far beyond the main cast. Over 25 seasons, the show has built an ensemble of secondary and recurring characters whose histories are worth examining in some detail. These characters are often remembered as fondly as the main cast by fans who grew up with the show, and their individual stories are full of unexpected details. Herbert, the elderly man who lives several doors down from the Griffins, is one of the show's most uncomfortable recurring characters. His attraction to Chris Griffin is never made implicit. The show has always been explicit about what Herbert's interest in Chris represents, which is part of what makes him difficult to defend as a comic creation. And yet Herbert has persisted for the show's entire run, and Mike Henry's performance has given the character enough humanity in his loneliness, in his genuine fondness for the Chris who does not return his interest, in the physicality of his slow, creaking movements through the world that he exists in a more complicated moral space than a simple villain. He is a character the show should probably not have created, performed in a way that makes him impossible to dismiss. Mort Goldman is the proprietor of the local pharmacy and a recurring target of the show's Jewish humor. The character is a walking collection of anti-Semitic stereotypes, rendered visible and exaggerated as a satirical strategy. Whether that strategy works, whether making the stereotypes this visible actually critiques them, or whether it simply perpetuates them while giving the show plausible deniability, is one of those questions that comedy critics have genuinely disagreed about for years. What is not in question is that Danny Smith, the writer who pitched and developed Mort Goldman, created a character with genuine comic specificity. The voice, the posture, the perpetual state of barely suppressed anxiety, these details come from somewhere, and they have made the character recognizable and reproducible in a way that purely generic stereotypes tend not to be. Tricia Takanawa is the Asian-American television reporter who covers news stories in the show's fictional city, and she is one of the more complicated recurring characters in the show's history. She functions as a specific parody of a specific type of television journalism, the local news reporter, who is simultaneously over-earnest and completely detached from the stories she covers. The character has appeared consistently across the show's run and has, in some episodes, been given more interesting material than her usual framing as a one-note cultural joke. Jerome is the bartender at the Drunken Clam for a period during the show's run. His relationship with the regular patrons, particularly Peter, generated some interesting material about race and friendship in working-class America, though the show's treatment of that material was, as with most things, inconsistent. Jerome's introduction in the Season 8 episode Jerome is the New Black is also notable as the episode that contains Quagmire's famous speech about why he hates Brian. The two storylines share the episode without particularly connecting to each other, which is characteristic of Family Guy's structure in that era. Donna Tubbs, later Donna Brown, is Cleveland's second wife and the mother figure of the Cleveland Show spin-off. Her character was developed most fully in that spin-off rather than in Family Guy proper, but her appearances in Family Guy after Cleveland's return from the spin-off gave her a presence in the broader Griffin universe that she had not previously had. Adam West as the mayor. Adam West is one of the show's most purely joyful recurring characters. The joke was always that the actual Adam West, the man who had played Batman in the 1960s and had spent decades navigating the complicated cultural legacy of that role, was the mayor of a small fictional Rhode Island city, and that he was deeply, completely strange. West performed the role with absolute commitment and no apparent self-consciousness. He seemed to understand exactly what the joke was and to find it as funny as the audience did. His death in 2017 left a genuine hole in the show, one that the tribute episode in season 16 acknowledged with more grace than Family Guy's later episodes typically managed. Seamus, the sailor whose arms and legs have been replaced by wooden pegs, is a character who exists entirely in the register of old-fashioned sea story parody. He is a peg-legged sailor, and the show mines that concept for its various implications. Why only his limbs? How does this work practically? What kind of injuries or diseases could produce this specific configuration? The characters' appearances are brief but memorable. The giant chicken Ernie is worth additional attention beyond what was covered in the main facts section. The chicken fights began as a one-time gag in the Season 2 episode Da Boom. Peter receives a coupon from a giant humanoid chicken, and the coupon turns out to be expired. The resulting confrontation becomes an extended, over-the-top fight sequence that parodies the escalating action of Hollywood blockbusters. The joke was so enthusiastically received that the writers brought the chicken back again, and then again, each time staging an even more elaborate fight sequence. What makes the chicken fights interesting from a production standpoint is that they represent the show doing something it almost never does in its regular episodes: constructing sustained physical comedy without the safety net of the cutaway format. The chicken fight sequences are long, continuous, elaborately choreographed pieces of comedy filmmaking that need to sustain their momentum across multiple minutes without interruption. They succeed because the writers understood that the joke was the escalation each new absurdity had to top the previous one, and they were willing to follow that logic wherever it led, including into submarines, outer space, and the interior of nuclear power plants. The fact that the show confirmed in 2023 that Ernie the Chicken is dead, that he has gone the way of all flesh, as the executive producers put it in a statement, is an interesting creative decision. The chicken fights had been a recurring element of the show for 20-plus years. Retiring the character formally within the show's continuity represents a kind of closure that Family Guy almost never provides for its running gags. The music of Family Guy, an underappreciated dimension. Family Guy's musical output across its 25 seasons is substantial enough to constitute a body of work in its own right. The show has produced hundreds of original songs, ranging from brief 20-second comedy pieces to full-length musical numbers that would not be out of place in a Broadway production. This musical dimension of the show is consistently underappreciated in discussions of its creative legacy. The Emmy Award the show won in 2002 for Outstanding Music and Lyrics was for the song You've Got a Lot to See from the episode Brian Wallows and Peter's Swallows. This episode centered on Brian's relationship with an elderly shut-in named Pearl, and the song in question was a tour through everything Pearl had missed during her years of isolation from the world, a kind of inventory of joy that was also a lament. The song was moving in ways that the show's humor often prevented its content from being, and the Emmy was a recognition that the musical craft involved was genuinely accomplished. McFarlane's own background in traditional pop music and his formal training as a singer are visible throughout the show's musical sequences. The arrangements are typically full and professional real orchestras, real musicians, recording sessions that take the music seriously as music rather than as a comedic delivery mechanism. When Stewie sings, the voice acting and the musical accompaniment are both produced at a level of craft that is unusual for animated television comedy. The Road to Rhode Island sequence in Season 2 is one of the most frequently cited examples of Family Guy's musical capability. The sequence, which features Brian and Stewie performing a Bing Crosby and Bob Hope-style comic duet about their disastrous road trip, is written and performed with a sophistication that demonstrates real knowledge of the tradition it is working in. It is funny because it understands the rules of the genre it is parodying, not just because it is making fun of the genre's conventions. Walter Murphy, the show's longtime composer, deserves specific credit for maintaining the musical quality of Family Guy across decades of production. Murphy's background, his earlier career as a pop arranger, and his work on A Fifth of Beethoven gave him a particular skill for building comedy into musical scores. He understood how to use music to amplify a joke, how to let the score comment on what the characters were doing, and how to create musical moments that were funny independent of the dialogue they accompanied. His contribution to the show's identity is rarely acknowledged in mainstream coverage of Family Guy, but it is significant. The Christmas Time is Killing Us sequence, from the Season 9 episode Road to the North Pole, is another example of the show's musical ambition. The song, which is a dark parody of Christmas music that details the mounting psychological damage that the holiday season inflicts on its participants, was nominated for an Emmy for Outstanding Original Music and Lyrics. It is a complete piece of musical comedy. The lyrical writing, the performance, the arrangement all work together in service of a joke that is simultaneously very dark and genuinely festive. These musical achievements are part of the answer to the question of why Family Guy, despite its many creative failures in the later seasons, has maintained enough of its audience to justify continued production. The show still, even in its diminished form, occasionally produces something that is genuinely surprising: a song that lands perfectly, an episode that commits fully to a sustained narrative, a character moment that earns its emotional weight. These moments are less frequent than they were in the early seasons, but they still happen, and they are enough to keep some portion of the audience returning. The final meditation. What 25 years means. 25 years is a long time for a human being. It is roughly a third of a human life. A person who was 18 years old when Family Guy premiered is now 43. They have lived through relationships, careers, children, losses, moves, transformations of every kind. The show that was there when they were 18 is still there now. It looks different. It sounds a little different. Some of the voices have subtle changes that accumulate over decades. The jokes are different. The characters are different. But the show is still there. This is one of the underappreciated functions of very long-running television. It provides continuity. In a world where everything changes, a show that has been going for 25 years is one of the few fixed points. Its characters have the same names. The same theme song plays, the same house, on the same street. When everything else in your life has shifted, the continuity of a familiar show can be genuinely comforting, even if the show itself is not as good as it used to be. This is not a sufficient justification for continuing to produce a lesser version of something indefinitely, but it is a real thing that people feel, and it explains some of the loyalty that Family Guy's audience has maintained even as the ratings have declined. They are not necessarily choosing the current version of the show over alternatives. They are choosing the continuity that the show represents, and the current episodes are part of the price of maintaining that continuity. Seth MacFarlane, who has been the face and voice of this continuity for 25 years, who has literally provided the voice of the family at the center of the show, seems to understand this in a way that he finds both meaningful and slightly burdensome. The show funds charitable work that he cares about. The show makes people happy. The show has become part of the fabric of American popular culture in a way that outlasts any individual's relationship with it. These are real things. They are not trivial. But they are also not the same as having something to say. And the most powerful creative work, the work that stays with you, that changes you, that you return to years later and find is still speaking to you, comes from people who have something to say. The early seasons of Family Guy had something to say. They had a specific, recognizable point of view about American family life, about working-class culture, about the way people talk and think and love and disappoint each other. The later seasons lost that point of view gradually, and the loss is visible in everything that followed. What remains is still remarkable in its way. The institution of Family Guy, the fact that it exists, that it has produced more than 400 episodes, that it sits alongside The Simpsons as one of the defining long-running animated comedies of American television history, is an achievement that deserves acknowledgement. The arc from a $50,000 pilot made by a 25-year-old in his house to a 27-season, 30-year franchise represents one of the most improbable success stories in the history of the medium. And the 177 facts we have traced tonight, from the thesis film at RISD to the deal with Disney, from Paul Timmons's Rhode Island accent to Seth MacFarlane falling asleep in an airport lounge on the morning that changed America, are the texture of that story. They are the small, specific, human details out of which an enormous cultural institution was built. They are proof that everything large begins as something small, and that the small things are always worth knowing. Wherever you are watching from tonight, whatever time it is there, I hope this has been good company for the late hours. Sleep well. Number the last stretch. Facts about facts and a few more details worth knowing. Before we close, there are a handful of additional details scattered across the show's history that do not fit neatly into any of the larger sections we have visited, but are too interesting to leave out entirely. These are the small curiosities, the brief footnotes, the one-line revelations, the minor biographical details and production notes that reward the truly dedicated fan. The show's working title during early development was not Family Guy. Alternative names were considered and discarded before the final title was settled. MacFarlane has mentioned in interviews that the process of landing on the right title involved more deliberation than people might expect. A title needs to be memorable, descriptive, and capable of functioning as a brand across multiple media. Family Guy hit all three criteria and had the additional quality of sounding slightly ironic given how unconventional the family it described actually was. The relationship between Family Guy and the state of Rhode Island is a matter of some local pride and some local discomfort. Rhode Island is the smallest state in the United States, with a population of just over 1 million people. Being the setting for one of the most widely watched animated comedies in the world has given the state a kind of involuntary celebrity. Real places in Rhode Island are referenced in the show. The Rhode Island School of Design itself appears, Providence comes up, and various Rhode Island landmarks and institutions are either referenced or lightly fictionalized. The state has generally received this attention with good humor. The show's depiction of a Catholic family, the Griffins, are nominally Catholic, though their practice of the religion is intermittent, and the show has made many jokes at Catholicism's expense, has generated complaints from Catholic advocacy organizations over the years. The Catholic League has issued formal complaints about specific episodes on multiple occasions. The show's response to these complaints has typically been to continue doing what it was doing, which is consistent with MacFarlane's broader approach to content controversies. Cleveland Brown's voice was taken over by Arif Zahir for season 19, after Mike Henry made the decision to step away from voicing the character. Henry, who is white, stated publicly that he had decided it was no longer appropriate for him to voice a black character. This decision was made in the context of broader conversations in the entertainment industry about the casting of animated characters and whether voice actors should share the racial identity of the characters they portray. Henry was ahead of that conversation in some respects and in step with it in others, and his decision generated considerable discussion when it was announced. Zahir, who had developed his Cleveland impression on YouTube and had been noticed by the Family Guy production team, stepped into the role for season 19 and has voiced Cleveland since. The show has made multiple jokes about its own animation quality over the years, including at points where the animation was genuinely substandard due to production pressures or studio changes. This kind of self-referential quality is either charming or irritating depending on your perspective. The argument for charm is that it demonstrates genuine self-awareness. The argument for irritation is that acknowledging a problem and fixing it are different things, and the show too often chooses the former without attempting the latter. MacFarlane's personal aesthetic, his love of the mid-20th century, of big band music and jazz and old Hollywood glamour, shows up not just in the show's music, but in the character of Brian Griffin. Brian's apartment, when it is shown, reflects these tastes. Brian's preferred drinks, his literary references, his general orientation toward a certain kind of cultured sophistication, all of these are reflections of MacFarlane's own sensibility. Brian is, in some respects, the character who most directly expresses what MacFarlane himself finds interesting and appealing. The show's writing staff has included a number of women across its run, but the ratio of women to men in the room has been lower than the ratio in the general population for most of its history. This imbalance has been acknowledged by the production team as a factor in some of the show's creative failures, particularly the treatment of Meg, which MacFarlane himself attributed partly to the room being predominantly male. The addition of more women writers in later seasons has been credited with improving the show's treatment of female characters generally. Family Guy has received strong ratings in international markets where it has been available. The United Kingdom has been one of the show's most consistent international audiences, and the show has generated genuine British fan communities that discuss it with the same level of engagement as American fan communities. The show's humor, which draws on a broad range of American cultural references, translates imperfectly to British audiences in some respects, but finds common ground in others. The family dynamics, the working-class comedy sensibility, and the show's willingness to push boundaries have all resonated internationally in ways that more specifically American shows sometimes do not. The cast and crew of Family Guy have worked together long enough that the production has its own internal culture, its own running jokes, its own history of creative disagreements and personal friendships. MacFarlane has described the voice recording sessions as enjoyable even in the later seasons, when his overall relationship with the show had become more complicated. The performance aspects of his work, the actual act of sitting in a booth and doing the characters' voices, remain something he finds satisfying even when other aspects of the show have generated frustration. The show's theme song begins with a lyric that has remained consistent since season 2, when the opening sequence was redesigned. The brief line that Peter and Lois sing together at the piano before the full theme kicks in sets the tone for everything that follows: a hint of warmth, a hint of melodrama, and a pivot into something broadly comedic. The theme has been reimagined and parodied within the show itself multiple times, including for holiday specials and special episodes. Each reimagining is a small creative act in itself. The production team has to decide which elements of the original to preserve and which to alter, and those decisions reflect the show's current sense of its own identity. And then, there is the simple fact of the house. 31 Spooner Street. The exterior shot that appears in establishing scenes throughout the show, the yellow house with the brown trim, the trees on either side, the street stretching out in both directions. This image is one of the most recognizable establishing shots in animated television. It signals home. Whatever chaos is about to unfold inside, the house on Spooner Street provides a visual anchor, a place that the audience knows the characters will return to. Every episode ends with the family still in the house, still on the street, still connected to each other despite everything. The house represents the persistence of family even through the show's worst creative periods. The Griffins keep coming back to each other. They live in the same place, they sit at the same table. They are, for better and for worse, still a family. That image, the yellow house, the trees, the quiet street, is where Family Guy began. And in some form, if the renewal deal holds and the show continues through its 30th anniversary, it is where Family Guy will still be, still there, still inhabited by the same voices, slightly older, still making jokes, still sitting down to dinner. There is something, after everything, worth taking comfort in that.